I did C-sections on women that didn't need C-sections. I probably cut hundreds of episiotomies that were unnecessary. It's all I knew. They made pregnancy into an illness that needed to be treated or managed as opposed to something that is natural by design. They don't care that they're exposing the woman to more tests, more fear, more anxiety. Doesn't matter. It's generating a ton of revenue. Hospitals and healthcare systems do not care about your health. They care about making a profit and keeping their doors open. And if you happen to get healthy besides, that's fine.
They're going to do whatever they can to fearmonger and trash home birthing to instill the fear of God back into women to pull them back in.
When there's a bad outcome from a home birth, they blame the home birth. When there's a bad outcome in the hospital, they blame birth. They don't blame the hospital. Yet, many babies that end up in the NICU came into the hospital inside their moms in perfectly healthy condition.
Dr. Stu, thank you so much for joining me.
Alec, thank you for having me. It's always an honor to have the opportunity to speak to an audience who I might not otherwise reach to talk about this topic, which I'm so passionate about.
You know, before we started recording, when I was getting ready for this episode, I just did a cursory Google search of common birth interventions. And obviously, Pitocin, epidurals.
It's a long list.
Cord clamping. Those are low-hanging fruit that most people realize. But when I really looked into it before we started recording, like the list is incredibly long. Like you don't realize how many interventions are involved in a typical hospital birth these days. And it's just wild to reflect on how far from nature we've wandered in a variety of ways in life, but birth being your entry into this realm has arguably event-based the most interventions of anything else that we do in this life, which is wild. Like that's your entry into this life and you're just being bombarded with stuff in the overwhelming majority of birthing experiences across the world these days.
Yeah, and most women who give birth these days, if they have to ask to reflect on it, are not happy about the way that went. They're not happy about the process. They love their babies and they love being pregnant, but they didn't really like how they were treated during pregnancy and how they were thought to be medically or just humanly incapable of doing this normal bodily function without the intervention of the medical community. Now, this is purposeful, by the way. I mean, takeover of obstetrics or maternity care. I don't even like the word obstetrics. The takeover of maternity care has been over hundreds of years, but really accelerated in the early 20th century with the advent of the Flexner Report and the Rockefellers taking what was something that was natural and taken care of by women helping women, neighbors helping women, that sort of thing, and they medicalized the whole thing. They turned it into pharmaceutical-based, interventional-based practice and purposely destroyed those people that were more natural. They vilified midwives, they vilified naturopaths, they vilified people who used homeopathy. They took over the medical schools. They made pregnancy into an illness or a disease that needed to be treated or managed as opposed to something that is natural by design and occasionally goes awry. And just like anything else, I've said this 1,000 times, but we don't have to think about breathing. We don't have to think about digestion. It just happens. Conceiving a baby, growing a baby, going into labor, nature does that without you thinking about it. In fact, when you think about it, you can actually mess it up a bit. What we need medicine for is when we have problems breathing, like pneumonia, or when we have problems digesting, like we have colitis, or Crohn's disease, or an ulcer. And the same thing in pregnancy. There are certain percentage of pregnant women who will develop a problem that requires medical treatment. But the medical cartel, as I will call them, can't handle only taking care of 10% of women. They want the whole kit and caboodle. And so they took it over and they pushed everybody aside and they medicalized it, forgetting the basic thing that we are all mammals. And if I might, just for a second, talk a little bit about mammalian birth, because if humans stop to think about how mammals give birth, then they might have a better understanding of what we're going to talk about over the next couple of hours. And when a mammal is prepared to give birth, she goes off by herself and she goes to a quiet, safe place. And when she's laboring, if she's hungry, she eats. If she's thirsty, she drinks. She moves about to help control the discomfort she might be having. She might pace, she might lie down, she might roll, but she isn't limited in her movement. When she's ready to give birth, it's not a sterile procedure. Wherever they are, they'll give birth and the babies will come out. Nobody will rush in and cut the cord. Nobody will ever separate that mother from the baby. If, however, a predator approaches or little kids run into the bedroom with the dogs in labor under the bed, the animal will put out adrenaline. Adrenaline will stop labor. The animal will get up, will run away, until it won't go back into labor until it feels safe. This way, nature ensures the best chance of survival. This is sort of basic stuff. So what we do to our human females is completely the opposite of what you would do if you were taking care of your own cow or your own horse, your own dog. You would leave them alone. You would tell the kids to leave them alone. You would not bother them. You would not pick up their food and water off the floor. You would not duct tape them to the coffee table in the room while you're watching the Super Bowl. You would not do those things. But that's what we do to the human female when we ask them to come to the hospital generally too early, and we make them change into a hospital gown. Why do we make them change into a hospital gown? What does it signify when you're changing into a hospital gown? It signifies that you're sick. You're a patient. Why can't they wear their jammies? Why can't they wear anything? Nothing. Why do they need to change into a hospital gown? Because when you go to the hospital doesn't know you're coming in for a pregnancy, an appendicitis, a broken leg, a gunshot wound. It's all the same. It's the same questions. It's the same format. It's the same forms that you sign. It's all the same. And then they put you in a bed, and then they put belts on you, and then they maybe start an IV and they draw blood on you. I'll get to alternative birthing methods and stuff like that, but none of those things are necessary 100% of the time, yet every woman is treated the same. And the idea that the bed is the center of attention in the hospital is because patients who are sick generally are in bed. So when we put a woman in bed, we're signifying that she's sick. But if you've ever been to a home birth and you walk in quietly and you see where the woman is, she'll almost never be laying in her bed. She'll be leaning on the bed, or she'll be in the shower, or she'll be in the kitchen, or she'll be leaning on her partner, or she'll be on all fours on the floor, or she'll be pacing, or she'll be out in the backyard walking around, but she won't be sitting in the bed. Yet the hospital, if you walk into any labor room in the hospital, there's only one thing that's in the center of the room, and that is the bed. So this whole medicalized version of things has taken over, and we've changed the culture, and we've convinced women, when I say we, that's the proverbial we, that they need help to have a baby. And that couldn't be more wrong for most women. And it does interfere with the process. And it becomes essentially a Mobius strip of intervention leading to need for more intervention, leading to more intervention, leading to a problem. And the thing that everybody talks about called the cascade of interventions. They find one little ditzel wrong, and then they need to do more testing. And then the more testing starts to make you worry. And now you're worried, and that's changing your whole chemistry inside. And what are you doing to the baby as it's forming when you're fearful as opposed to when you're joyous and happy? When you're secreting, I know I'm going.
No. I there's one thing that I want to say on that it really stuck out to me, the adrenaline piece, right? Like you talked about how mammals, when they have this flood of adrenaline come in because they feel that they're not in a safe environment anymore, it can stop labor temporarily until they find a space where they can release, come out of fight or flight, and then the labor process picks back up. What are we doing with women in the hospital setting? Whether they realize it or not, we're flooding them with adrenaline.
Right. Which suppresses oxytocin, which is not only your labor hormone, but it's your bonding hormone, your love hormone, your milk letdown hormone. Listen, the medicalized birth model, a lot of doctors are just kind of pawns in the system. They used to be captains of the ship. Doctors have been made now essentially deck swabs. They became employees, getting a salary, working a shift. They don't believe Mother Nature has a point. Nature isn't stupid. Nature designs things for a reason. Yes, occasionally things go wrong, a lot of the things that go wrong are probably iatrogenic, meaning that we caused the problem. But even in cases where we didn't, where a woman develops preeclampsia, who knows? It may be, your specialty, it may be diet related, it may be environmental related, who knows? But in those particular cases, but when that doesn't happen, all these things that they're doing to women are all that they know, because they don't like nature's chaos. They don't care that their handling of nature's chaos may create all kinds of other chaos. They're comfortable with their own chaos. And they're comfortable with a system that protects them from liability. We have lots of different forces that are causing this, but none of them are for the benefit of the mother. All the things that I described to you earlier about the IVs and the peeing in a cup and the changing into a hospital gown and the monitoring and all this, none of that's done for the benefit of the woman. They'll tell you it's done for the benefit of the woman because safety is a canard that's always used to get you to do something. French philosopher Albert Camus said the welfare of humanity is always the alibi of tyrants. And so when you think about what that means, it's like, as a parent, sometimes you're tyrannical and you'll say, don't play with matches or don't run into the street, because yes, that's true, but it's also you're being, you're using safety as a way to control your children. I got a whole nother topic on that, but it's not my specialty, but I'm really interested in.
Well, you are a parent though. You have 4 kids.
Yeah, I wish I could do it over again. I would do it so differently, knowing now. And that's hopefully what will happen when people hear this who are thinking about having their first kid, or they've had one and they want another one. Maybe they'll start thinking a little differently about it. But the medical model doesn't appreciate nature's design. And so they don't think that when they cause a little interference, like putting a woman in bed or stressing her out by saying things like, well, you're over 35, or, your husband is so tall and you're so small, or your baby's feeling a little bit big, or why are you dropping these hints? Who are you placating here? You are actually projecting your own anxieties onto the women that you're supposed to be caring for, as opposed to providing actual care. That's the whole thing. Healthcare is essentially an oxymoron. It doesn't really mean what people think it means. And we're stuck in a situation right now where we went from, in the early 70s, this is the thing I really want to talk about for a second, is the idea of high risk and high risk specialties. So in the early 70s, we had a C-section rate of around 5% in the Western world, not just the United States, in the Western world. And the induction was almost unheard of. And epidurals were pretty much non-existent. And 1 in 3 women maybe had 1 ultrasound back in the early 70s. And we had a C-section rate of, like I said, 5%. Now we have a C-section rate closing in on 35%, which, if you do the math, is a 700% increase in cesarean. We have about a third of women are getting induced artificially, early, most of the time for no reason. Don't tell me that suddenly in 50 years, a third of women now have so many medical problems that they need to be induced early. About 80% of women are getting epidurals with no concern about how that interferes with nature's design for labor. Pretty much every woman has at least 2, maybe 3 or 4 ultrasounds in pregnancy, and a lot of them with high-tech color flow, Doppler, stuff like that. Why am I saying all this? Well, because it really doesn't matter what the intent is with all these interventions. What matters is outcomes. And our outcomes have not gotten better since 1970. And I'm going to make a statement on your show that I've been tossing around in my head. I've been looking into the Society for Maternal Fetal Medicine, which are the high-risk doctors. It was founded in 1977, coincidentally. So what happened before 1977? Who took care of the diabetics in pregnancy? The OBs did. Who took care of the preeclamptics? Who took care of the supposedly small babies or twins or breeches? The OBs did. In 1977, a group of doctors got together, created a high-risk specialty, and over the last almost 50 years, they have essentially taken over the profession. They've relegated the typical OB to being a gatekeeper. No OB takes care of anybody with a problem now. They always refer them to maternal fetal medicine specialists. Maternal fetal medicine specialists, in turn, are now teaching all the they've taken over the training in the residency program. So they run the obstetrical part of the residency program. They're teaching all the future doctors to be completely dependent on maternal fetal medicine doctors. Maternal fetal medicine doctors create all kinds of unnecessary interventions, which then they can charge for. And it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy that how come in 1970 we had all these lower interventions and we had the same outcomes, if not better, than we have now. We have high-risk specialists. Our outcomes are getting worse. People need to just stop, take a deep breath, and look at that and not get all huffy because you love your OB or you love your MFM. Or if you're an MFM listening, you're getting all upset and getting defensive. Stop for a second and just think about what I'm saying. What you are doing has not improved outcomes. Why are you doing it? And I can answer that. They're saying, well, if we save just one kid that might have been lost, we've done a good thing. Yes, it's a good thing. But what have you done to all the other pregnancies that didn't need you? All the women that are worrying now, all the women that are taking more time off of work to go to more appointments and getting exposed theoretically to non-ionizing radiation from ultrasound, which no one has really studied in depth, especially the color flow Doppler and the 3D ultrasound and all that. No one's really looked at that. The last good studies on humans in ultrasound came out of China in the late 80s, and the machines have gotten more powerful. Nobody's looking at it. They're telling you it's safe. We've all heard that. You're nodding.
I've been nodding this whole time over here.
It's safe and effective. It's all that sort of thing. Nobody knows that. But we know that our kids are sicker than ever. We know that our immune health begins in the womb. If our immune health begins in the womb and our kids are sicker than ever, and we could blame it on all the other things you want to blame it on out there, all the other factors, the heavy metals and the vaccines and the 5G and the glyphosate and the geoengineering and all other stuff, fine. But before all that stuff, we were still starting to get worse. So what are we doing? Why did this happen? It generates a ton of revenue for worse outcomes. That just doesn't make any sense to anybody who considers himself a true scientist. If you think about it, you would follow what Einstein said and basically say doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And they're constantly creating more interventions. Paper came out this week that says that in a specific type of twins called monochorionic diamniotic twins, that women should have ultrasound every 2 weeks for the entire pregnancy, and with color flow Doppler to look at blood flow the entire pregnancy. Now, I don't want to get too much in the weeds here, but that is completely unnecessary. The positive predictive value of that test isn't very good. A lot of that stuff is easily picked up on 2D ultrasound. They don't need to do it. They don't care that they're exposing the woman to more tests, more fear, more anxiety. Doesn't matter. It's generating a ton of revenue. And by the way, only 26% of the countries in the world agree with that assessment. And which countries are they? I don't know specifically, but I can probably guarantee you they have a for-profit healthcare system. What have we done?
Yeah. What have we done? Man. Yeah, so I was over here nodding the entire time that he was on that epic monologue. How did you find yourself as a classically trained OB-GYN coming to these conclusions?
It wasn't an epiphany. It was something that took over time. I was as you said, I was classically trained. I went to University of Minnesota Medical School. I matched my residency program at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles. I had the good fortune of being a resident in the early 1980s when there was a lot more hands-on stuff that we were doing then. Breech was not considered abnormal. Twins were not considered abnormal. And my residency program had affiliation with LA County USC Women's Hospital, which in the early 1980s was the busiest labor unit in the country, doing about 22,000 births a year there, which if you break that down is about 65 babies a day. And as a resident, I was there every other day for 4 months. So you can do the math and figure that out. I saw a lot of pathology. And by pathology, I mean pathology. I don't mean a lot of normal stuff, but a lot of pathology, which they consider pathology.
Are you saying true pathology or okay?
Yeah.
Because they consider birth a pathology now.
Yeah, they consider all of it, but I'm saying true pathology. I'm saying
got it.
Preterm labor anomalies, women with their own cardiac problems, severe preeclamptics, eclamptics, placenta previas, all that's pathology. Yeah. I'm not talking about twins or breeches or, other things that are now considered high risk. We'll get to the definition. Remind me, make a little note, remind me to get to high risk. So I came out of residency very, very well trained in that model of care. And I started a practice. In those days, you didn't come out like you do now and get a job working for a major corporation and work a shift and get paid a salary and have a nice pension and get 6 weeks paid vacation or whatever, 4 weeks, whatever. You didn't have that. You built your practice from scratch and you hustled. So you covered other doctors when they were on vacation. You assisted them in surgery. You maybe covered ERs. You maybe did shifts at other hospitals. You might have worked at free clinics. You just hustled to build your practice. And slowly but surely, you brought patients in. And one of the things that happened to me fortuitously, which I never saw coming, was that I was approached by some local midwives in LA. They knew that I was one of the new residents out of training and asked if I would take their home birth transports. And I said, yeah, I would do that. And I've said this 1,000 times, but I didn't do it because I thought home birth was a good idea or that home birth midwifery was a good idea. I did it because every time a woman was transferred into my care, that generated revenue for me. It's purely mercenary. And in those days, if I charged $2,000 for something, guess what I got paid? $2,000. Amazing. It doesn't work that way in insurance anymore.
Right.
You get 12 cents on the dollar. But
I need to find someone to interview on health insurance and stuff because I feel like the middlemen there are a big problem.
We can go into that if you want.
I may want to towards the end. I'll put another note on that because
I have thoughts on that too.
Okay, yeah, that'd be great.
So I began to take their transports and I began to realize that these women weren't crazy, that they were actually far more educated than my own clients were, that the midwives had a lot to offer. And I had, because I wasn't busy yet, I had a lot of time to spend. When a woman was transferred into my care, I would meet her at the hospital and I would introduce myself because I knew I was just my upbringing. My parents taught me to be polite and the golden rule and all that. And I knew that they were disappointed because their birth plan had not worked and they were now being transferred to the hospital, generally for non-emergent reasons, usually from exhaustion or just wanting pain medicine. So they would get an epidural and they would get to rest. And then I would go into the lounge and I'd sit and talk to the midwife because in those days, the midwives came with them. There were no restrictions on who could come to the hospital or wear a mask or any of that crazy stuff we just went through. And we'd sit in the lounge for a while the woman was actually sleeping before we were probably going to have to start Pitocin on them. But we give them some rest because that's what they needed. And maybe some nourishment because that's probably what they needed. And we would sit and talk and they would tell me how they do things. And they would ask me questions and I'd ask them questions. And then they'd ask me questions about why do I do certain things this way? And I very much didn't have an answer. Like, why do you cut the cord right away? Why do you take the baby to the warmer? Why do you wash off her bottom with betadine before a vaginal delivery? Why is she on her back with her legs up in stirrups and covered in sterile drapes? It's like, I don't know. That's just how we do it. And that's that's not a reason, Alec. That's not a reason. But that is the reason. If you go to a hospital right now and you have a hospital that's pretty much still doing the same thing that I was doing 40 years ago, and a lot of hospitals are doing things that way, and you ask the nurse, why are you rubbing the baby down? Why are you taking the baby over to the warmer? Why do you have to cut the cord within 60 seconds? They'll say, well, that's just the way we do it. But you wouldn't do that for any other mammal. You just wouldn't. You wouldn't be interrupting them in labor. You wouldn't be doing vaginal exams on them. I mean, how many, my co-host on my podcast, Bliss Young, I love this quote, but she says, no one's ever checked a tiger at 7 centimeters. Why do we need to check women's progress in labor with vaginal exams if labor is progressing normally? But we do. And the question would be, well, Stu, why are you doing that? It's like, well, I gotta plot it on the curve. Well, why? And I don't know.
And a deeper question there on the births that aren't, quote, progressing normally is how much did interventions or lack of true physiological birth education led to birth not progressing normally?
A large percentage. And by the way, what does progressing normally even mean?
Right.
I do this whole thing about the labor curve, which is called the Friedman curve. This is where we're going to go off on a tangent here. But Friedman curve is an observational curve that was done by a guy named Friedman in the late 50s and early 60s. And he found that women in active labor, which was then defined beyond 4 centimeters. How did they know they were 4 centimeters? Because they did vaginal exams, but would dilate at a certain rate, like 1.2 centimeters per hour. Go figure. That's like saying, well, it's an analogy of like, well, all apples are ripe on September 12th. Well, no, they're not. Okay. So not all women will dilate at 1.2 centimeters per hour, but that was the average. And that curve was then taken from a predictive curve to be, a observational curve to become a predictive curve. And so they used that curve. And if you were moving slower than that, your labor was considered to be dysfunctional or moving too slow. And that's where they would want to then rupture your membranes or start Pitocin or move you along. But if you understand how a curve is designed, 50% of women are below the curve because the curve is sort of an average of how fast they go. So by using this curve incorrectly, doctors have now been indoctrinated to believe that a woman is moving too slow if she's not dilating at this rate, which means you're defining that 50% of women are moving too slow. Does anyone believe that that makes any sense whatsoever? Did anyone stop to think about it? And the answer is no, because they wanted to use that curve as a way to control labor, to justify their interventions. And maybe they saw it as a way to limit liability, because the longer a labor went, the more likely maybe something was to go wrong, and then therefore they were going to be held responsible. And all these other forces, the financial forces, the legal forces, the expediency, the time forces, are all these things that doctors were dealing with at the time. But this labor curve came in, and it's based on a completely false premise, and yet it's still used very much today. So I don't even know where we were before I went off on that tangent. But yeah, so we'll figure it out. It'll come back to me.
Well, talk to me about high risk, because you brought that up, that you wanted to touch on that.
There is no definition for high risk.
My wife was labeled high risk. Can I just share the birth experience with my wife real quick? Is that okay?
It's your show.
Well, it's my show, but
I would love you to share an anecdotal story, because, by the way, the best way to learn something is not for me to be throwing out statistics at people. The best way we learn something is storytelling. So let's tell a story.
Yeah. And, for me, of course, someone could come to these conclusions through hearing this podcast or through looking at the data themselves. That's all great. But I think most people would acknowledge that the best teacher is direct experience in most cases. And of course, unfortunately, because we've been indoctrinated to believe in the allopathic sick care system so much, and it's just ingrained itself into so many aspects of our lives, those experiences tend to be somewhat negative in order to wake us up. So that's the case with our 3 very different birth experiences with our 3 kids. Our first, we had woken up to the problems with vaccines, but we had not woken up to anything else with respect to birth. And so my wife wanted to try for a normal physiological birth, but was not adequately educated. And I think that's another interesting topic to get into too. Like, what does that actually look like for women? And like maybe pose the idea that women should be educated on this in schooling in some form. And maybe there's some need in a lot of the alternative education that people are coming up with, homeschooling and unschooling and things like this, to actually educate on birth for women. But all that being said, not adequately educated. And her water broke, and we didn't know any better, so we immediately went to the hospital. Of course, the birth, quote, wasn't progressing, and thus was then invited into the cascade of interventions, epidural, Pitocin, the whole 9 yards, not progressing at all. And so she was finally told that, okay, you need to have a C-section, and then had a C-section. And leading up to that, though, and this is the other piece. So just before we got pregnant, my wife reversed 2 different autoimmune conditions that she had been suffering with for nearly 9 years at that point, 9 to 10 years, and had no symptoms whatsoever of her autoimmune stuff. So for all intents and purposes, like they were non-existent, right? But because she was previously, quote, autoimmune, she was labeled high risk. We had an ultrasound once a week for the duration of the pregnancy, once a week. And going back to whether that's actually safe or not, I think there's a strong argument to be made that it has not been proven safe whatsoever to give ultrasounds that frequently to a baby no, it hasn't at all. It absolutely has not. And so that was the first one. And, it's wild because even with all of that occurred, this is more on the esoteric spiritual side of things, the numerology related to our son's birth, like some very meaningful dates for when my wife and I first started dating, when we got married, all line up with my son's height and weight and all these just wild stuff. But so second birth, we are seeing an OB-GYN in Oklahoma. My wife keeps letting her know that, hey, we would like to try for a VBAC. And this OB, very polite, but says, statistically speaking, that's probably not going to happen. We can definitely try. Also, your husband's really tall. He has a really big head. True. But so the likelihood that you're going to be able to push a baby out that way is going to be very small, but we'll attempt. By around 26 weeks, my wife and I had a conversation. She was like, I just don't, this doesn't feel good. I don't feel like I'm being empowered here. Let's try to consult with a midwife. So we consulted with a midwife in Wichita Falls, Texas, just across the Oklahoma border where we were living. And that midwife, when we consulted with him, was so empowering. Like, no, your body knows exactly what to do. You'll be totally fine. I fully trust that you will deliver this baby normally, normal physiological birth. You'll totally surprise yourself. You've been conditioned, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we called that OB-GYN and said, hey, we're not coming back. 38 weeks, that OB-GYN called my wife and said, you're making a potentially catastrophic mistake. You need to be induced. You are high risk. This could be very, very bad for you. So
can I just say that is so unethical of him to do that? Yeah.
I mean, it was disgusting. It was disgusting. And I mean, it put the fear of God in my wife because we're still in the phase of sort of dissolving our tendency to outsource to people in white coats, right?
Well, when you plant seeds of doubt in somebody like that, it's kind of like the movie Inception when they're sitting on the roof, they say, don't think about elephants.
Think about elephants.
You can't get rid of that thought. When I say it's unethical for what they did there, but he's projecting his own anxieties, his own fears. He truly believes that it's dangerous. He doesn't know the data. He doesn't care to individualize his care. He doesn't know that you want a third baby or a fourth baby or a fifth baby. He doesn't care.
Right. And luckily, we were able to sort of dissolve that fear. And at around 41 weeks, that's another topic that I want to discuss too, is like, what is normal, quote, full-term labor, full-term, pregnancy. At around 41 weeks, we delivered a healthy baby in a bathtub. My wife pulled the baby out of the water, turned and looked at me and said, I did it. And it was the cutest thing ever. And it took every
It's life-changing for both of you. Yeah, for both of you.
It is life-changing. It is so empowering for her. Yeah, and it's so empowering for her to see that, to trust her body. And it took every ounce of restraint inside both of us not to call that OB-GYN and be like, hey, delivered a healthy baby at 41 weeks. Wouldn't have made any difference. It wouldn't have made any difference. He
would have said you got lucky.
Right. Yeah, he would. Exactly.
He doesn't know the data. And I don't need to go through the data, but the success rate of VBAC after a single low transverse cesarean section is extremely high. Mm-hmm. Even in hospitals, it's 70 to 80%, according to the NIH. In the home birth world, it's over 90% success rate with VBAC.
That's incredible.
Right. Yeah. So there are a couple things that you brought up that I remember what track we were on before I lost my train of thought.
Please go.
Which was my path to get to where I am now. Mm-hmm. Remember that was the question. But I want to talk a little bit about education first. Yeah, one of the things that we really need to do, and I think the culture that we're forming, that's the alternative culture, we need to educate our young women and men when they're 13, 14, 15 years old about their bodies, about the menstrual cycle, about that it's not something that's gross and guys shouldn't be making jokes about it and girls shouldn't be ashamed of it and it's actually a normal function, and about pregnancy itself. So when they come out and they do decide at some point to have a baby and they go see an OB-GYN, they'll know when they're being gaslit. Because most people know almost nothing about this process and they've abdicated their responsibility to people who don't know anything about this process. if I can be so bold as to say that. They know about pathology. They don't know about normal. And they see everything as pathology, whereas midwifery sees birth as a normal function of the human body that occasionally goes awry, and they're willing to accept uncertainty. The fact that medical doctors are not willing to accept uncertainty So they interject their processes into them, which creates all kinds of problems. As I said earlier, those problems don't bother them. So education, we need to change the system. We need to stop teaching them how to put condoms on a banana, and we need to teach them about how their bodies are. And they can do this in public schools and stuff like that. I just don't know how you get to change something that monolithic. But if you can't change it there, then you bring it into your home and you teach your young kids about the normalcy. And one of the ways to teach them about normalcy is for them to witness mom giving birth to their siblings at home.
Our third was a home birth. That was the other one I was going to get to.
That's how traditional. We've sterilized birth. We've sterilized death too. People rarely see somebody pass away. People used to die in the home that they were born in. And the family, it was just a normal function. And having little kids running around as grandma is passing away, it's probably heartwarming for grandma to hear those sounds are the last thing she hears. And for a 5-year-old to see their little brother being born and mom doing that normalizes that. That part of the whole purpose of the medicalized birth model and the whole Flexner thing and taking over medicals was to distance women from the normalcy of their bodies. Okay, so I got to the point where these midwives approached me, and then we started talking about labor, and I was sitting and learning from the midwives and why I was doing all these things, and I brought up the things. So after about 10 years, I really realized that I can't continue to do what I'm doing anymore. It took a while. I feel bad. I did C-sections on women that didn't need C-sections. I did inductions on women. I didn't know that. I put women up in lithotomy position and wiped off their bottoms with betadine. I probably cut hundreds of episiotomies that were unnecessary. It's all I knew. But the midwives opened the new vista for me, and I began to think of a different way of doing things. And so I started a collaborative midwifery practice with 2 certified nurse midwives in a hospital setting. Cedars at that time did not allow midwives to have privileges, so we moved up to Ventura County. And we had a collaborative practice for about 15 years, Alex, and we did really good work. And it was beautiful collaboration. The midwives took care of all the normal stuff, the annuals, the pap smears, the well woman visits, the prenatal care, the normal deliveries, and I took care of the abnormal pap smears, the ectopic pregnancy, the breech delivery, the C-sections, the forceps or vacuums that might have been necessary. And we had a 7% C-section rate at a hospital that in the mid-90s had an overall 26 to 28% C-section rate. That's better than it is now, because now it's up to 35% or 40% in a lot of places. But in the 90s, the average C-section rate was 26, 27%. We were at 7%. And it's not because we took only low-risk patients, quote, low risk, unquote. I took care of breeches and twins and previous C-section after 1, after 2, after 3, and we had those good outcomes. The problem was, as you can expect, is that it made everyone in the hospital that we worked at uncomfortable because we were doing things that were outside their, quote, standard of care, which is another term that doesn't mean anything. Standard of care is defined as what like-minded physicians would do or practitioners would do in a similar circumstance. But if no one's doing breech delivery, then breech delivery is outside the standard of care. If no one's offering VBAC, then VBAC. But is breech and VBAC really outside the standard of care? Whose standard? And why should midwives be judged by the standard of limited OBs who don't do those things? But yet that's how the system works. So after about 15 years, they decided that they were going to ban the midwives, they banned VBAC, they were going to ban breech delivery, and I was going to fight them, except that I was advised by people that it's a losing battle, that the only way to fight them is legally, and the legal system is really tilted toward the hospital because it's an administrative process. It's not a civil process. You're accused, judged, and tried by the same entity, which is the hospital. And so what the hospital decided to do was not renew my privileges, which they have the right to do. Every 2 years or so, doctors have to reapply for privileges. Yeah, even though we had better outcomes than everybody there. Well, we made the anesthesiologists uncomfortable because we were doing things that the other OBs had told them were dangerous. And a lot of our patients didn't want epidurals, so they weren't generating revenue either. We made the pediatricians uncomfortable because our moms didn't want babies to have hepatitis vaccine or vitamin K or iGoop. And maybe they wanted to go home 4 hours after they gave birth. That could have been 10 o'clock at night, midnight. And they had a policy at the hospital that said, no doctor I mean, no baby can go home until it's seen by the pediatrician. Now, I'll digress for just a second. That policy was put in place in the late 80s because they figured out that doing a newborn exam was uncaptured revenue. Insurance companies paid about $200-$300 for a newborn exam. But then when managed care came in, managed care or Medicaid or Medi-Cal in California, they said, well, we're not paying for that. So suddenly, the policy they put in place to generate more revenue for themselves came back to bite them in the ass because babies couldn't go home until they were seen by pediatricians. Our moms wanted to go home at 10 o'clock at night or 2 o'clock in the morning because they just were transferred, they just wanted to be home. They didn't want to be in the hospital. And the doctors didn't want to come in for that. So then our moms would have to leave against medical advice, and that would stir up the whole dilemma of, is that safe? And should we call Child Protective Services? And all that mess, simply because they had a policy in place that was not put in for safety, but was put in to generate revenue. And so eventually what happened is that I had good advisors, and I had been working with midwives now for almost 24 years. And they suggested to me, they knew what was happening, and they suggested to me, Stu, you should come and start doing home birthing. And even though I had been backing midwives since the mid 80s, and we're talking 2010 now, I had never been to a home birth. And so I was a little bit nervous about going to my first home birth because I asked the questions that most dads ask, like, what happens if this happens? What happens if she starts bleeding?
It is typically the dads.
Yeah. Well, the dads are concerned about safety and cost. That's generally what we care about. And, we're the protectors. And the midwives reassured me. And so I started going to home births. And of course, I never went to a home birth without a midwife because one, I'm a guy. First of all, I have guy energy, and I try to keep my energy out of the room because I'm a distraction. I have great skill and great patience and great knowledge, but I also have guy energy. Midwives can do things that I can't do. And I can do things they can't do. And so together it was a really great collaboration. I took that hospital collaboration and now turned it into home birthing. And they did home birthing for the next 12 years. And then sort of age caught up with me. But I started to realize that, well, I was doing breeches in the hospital. Why can't I do them at home? And I was doing twins in the hospital. Why can't I do them at home? Just because ACOG says it's an absolute contraindication, well, ACOG says a lot of things in their guidelines that are not necessarily based on any factual information. As a matter of fact, people should understand this, 2/3 of ACOG's guidelines are based on what's called level C evidence or something called consensus opinion. Now, if they're not, level A evidence is like a randomized control trial. Level B evidence is maybe meta-analysis or chart review or looking backwards. And level C evidence is based on a bunch of guys sitting around coming up with an opinion.
Hey y'all, I'm here with Melissa Kupsch from Remedy Academy of Homeopathy. We are so stoked here at the Way Forward to be partnering with Melissa and Remedy in order to spread the message of homeopathy across the world, and also to partner on the eventual development of healing centers across the United States.
People are pretty quickly coming to realize that frequency is the future of medicine. We are witnessing the great resurgence of homeopathy right now. We're really moving away from that suppressive medical model, whether it's for eczema, asthma, hormones, fertility, anxiety, depression, trauma, whatever it is, it all starts as energy in the person's field first. If we change our field, we can completely change our life. Our 2-year academy is open worldwide to anyone who wants to become a homeopath. We've got 5 lecturers and we currently have over 500 students enrolled, which is record numbers in our field. A career in homeopathy is amazing for anyone who wants flexibility in their work and who wants to be valuable in creating this new world. We have stay-at-home parents enrolled, we have ex-medical professionals, grandparents signed up who want to learn how to heal their grandchildren and pass on that invaluable knowledge. We even have husband and wife teams. So my husband enrolled in the course with no prior knowledge of health as a background, and he is loving it.
Kylie is also enrolled as well, so my partner is, and she's so stoked to become a homeopath and to be helping to spread this message across the world.
The thing that we hear from so many of our students is, I found my thing. Homeopathy is the key. We harness frequencies from nature and we alter the field of all creations. So if anybody wants to join us or they want to know more about it, they can visit our website.
Yeah, and all that information will be in the show notes. So if you want to learn more about Remedy Academy, also Remedy Collective, also some of the homeopathic products that they have, please just head to the show notes. All of that will be listed there. A bunch of guys who are trained in pathology.
That's correct.
Don't understand physiological birth, coming up with a consensus opinion based on that. And you know what's wild to reflect on just real quick is that for most OB-GYNs and other sort of quote unquote experts who work in a hospital setting, their opinion of home birthing is colored by the, dare I say, relatively few home births that do end up in a hospital. That's all they see. So their idea of what a home birth is, oh, this is dangerous and unsafe. This is wound up in a hospital. So any consideration of a normal physiological birth is going to go out the window. They're going to refer back to their pathologized version of birth and then come up with consensus guidelines based on that.
When there's a bad outcome from a home birth, they blame the home birth. When there's a bad outcome in the hospital, they blame birth. They don't blame the hospital. Yet, many babies that end up in the NICU, that's a newborn intensive care unit, came into the hospital inside their moms in perfectly healthy condition. And somehow the process of being in the hospital and being maybe induced for no reason or having a C-section prematurely or being, whatever reason, the hospital and that cascade of interventions led to that baby ending up in the NICU. And that doesn't faze them. As a matter of fact, this is very perverse, but you'd think the hospital would not like that because you'd think that would be something that they'd want to avoid as a baby in the NICU. But a baby in the NICU generates a huge amount of revenue for the hospital. And let me just give you another statistic, and this one's from the CDC, that bastion of
bastion of truth.
Well, statistics from the CDC are statistics from the CDC. 30 years ago, or maybe it's 15, it might be 15 or 20 years ago, the rate of NICU admissions was just around 5%. Now the rate of NICU admissions is 9.8%. That's almost 10% of babies are being admitted to the NICU. Now, let's see why that could possibly be and see if there's any good reason for that based on the medical system. One is that babies are sicker and mothers are sicker than they used to be. Well, maybe that's true, but isn't that what the purpose of the obstetrical system is to make sure mothers and babies are healthy? So doubling of the NICU rate isn't a sign that your system is working really well. Maybe it's an iatrogenic thing. Maybe more babies are going to the NICU because we're inducing more babies and we're sectioning more babies, and those babies aren't ready to come out or something's happening and they need to go to the NICU. That doesn't reflect well on your obstetrical care system. And the third one is the worst one, and that is maybe the hospitals are creating more policies that put babies in the NICU because it generates more revenue. Like, I know that the hospital I used to work at had a policy that if a baby was born to an infant of a diabetic mother, even if it was perfectly fine, that baby had to go be observed in the NICU, which is probably the worst thing that you can do for a newborn baby, is take it away from its mother. Any newborn baby, even a preemie. And they had, if your membranes had been ruptured for over some arbitrary number, 18 hours, 24 hours, whatever, they would give you time with your baby, and then they'd say, we have to watch that baby in the NICU. Again, a policy not based on anything scientific, created by administrators and risk managers. What is their fiduciary duty? It's not to the woman, the family, or the baby, or anything. Their fiduciary duty is to the hospital, and is to keep the hospital financially viable. And how do you keep a hospital financially viable? You put more babies in the NICU. You don't try to lower your C-section rate. You induce more women. You run more blood tests. You do more ultrasounds. This is the system, is to try to change a system that is so embedded with these things that drive it, make it almost impossible to make improvements that are going to be significant enough to change the course that we're on and the health of our moms and our babies.
When we look at those ACOG, that's what it is, right? ACOG, ACOG?
American College of OB-GYN, or sometimes they say the American Congress of OB-GYN, either one.
So when we look at those guidelines, you're talking about breech and you're talking about twins. So those, the level C evidence led to them coming up with a decision that these are considered to be what specifically?
Okay. The evidence, in every topic, there's some level A evidence, B evidence, and C evidence. Yep. What I'm just saying is that 2/3 of their guidelines are level C evidence. They know that. they put that information out in the community anyway. Hospital administrators see an ACOG guideline and they say, well, the best way we can limit our liability is to follow ACOG to the letter. ACOG knows that their guidelines are going to then be used as benchmarks for quality. They should be very careful before they put something out there, but they're not. They put stuff out there and then the hospital administrators and stuff take it and use it. And there are certain things about breech and twin delivery that there's good evidence that this should be done this way or that way or whatever. And then there's really bad evidence, like sectioning all breeches has no basis in good medicine.
Is that the standard of care, essentially?
Pretty much. 98% of breeches in the United States are delivered by C-section. In our world, we had, I think for our breeches, we had about a 9% C-section rate.
Wow. So 9 versus 98.
And in our twins, about 75% of twins are sectioned in the United States. And our C-section rate for twins in the home setting, properly selected, was 8.7%. Now, my numbers aren't big enough to reach that, quote, statistical significance. No one's going to have enough numbers to do that. You can't study certain things when they're rare. Like something that happens 1 in every 300 sets of twins, you need 20 years of data to get enough information to make it seem statistically significant. But here's the thing about statistical significance. It either agrees with what common sense would tell you or it's wrong. Now, I know that that's simplistic and it's not scientific, but tell me when science has told you something that's contrary to what common sense would tell you, and that the science has turned out to be correct and not, completely fabricated, which again, people have been paying attention the last 5 years. You have to understand the stuff that's coming out, not just from COVID, but now that we have the MAHA people in Washington and Marty McCary at the CDC and Jay Bhattacharya at the NIH and Robert Kennedy stuff. I hope that eventually they get to maternity care like they're getting to some of the other things. It's not high on their priority list right now, but if they're listening.
Should be.
They're listening. Again, children's health begins in the womb. It begins before they're even conceived. It begins in the health of the father and the sperm and the mother and the egg. And it begins at all those things. And there's no focus on that.
So when you were overseeing these home births, by the way, before I ask this question, how many home births do you think you've overseen by now? Or you've attended? Really?
Well, I stopped doing home birth in 2022.
Okay.
And I know exactly how many. It was 412.
412.
Yeah.
Okay, quick question on that, anecdotally speaking. How many, you said roughly 8 of just the twin home births have ended, 8% of the twin home births have ended up in C-section, right? And you said roughly 9% of the breech have ended up in C-section.
Yeah, and there's a big difference between a woman having her first baby, which is called a primip or primipara. The rate is higher, much higher. Women that are what are called multiparas have already given birth vaginally at least one time. The success rate in my breech study was 100%, and in my twin study was 97.9%. So we essentially, of all the breeches and twin moms I had at home, only one twin mom who was a multip was not successful. Again, the caveat being that my numbers are not big enough to reach that
statistical
that p-value that you're supposed to have, right?
Understandable, right? But it's still, anecdotally speaking, more important in my opinion.
It just shows what's possible,
right. In general, what would you say your C-section rate? Because I'll preface this by saying, a friend of mine, Ayla Cuenca, who is a doula. Yeah, Ayla's awesome. Yeah. So she has a friend who is a midwife, and if I remember correctly, she said this friend has overseen roughly 1,000 natural births at this point. And this is when I interviewed Ayla a couple years ago. And she said that only, I think, 8 of that 1,000 had ended up in C-section in total, which I would guess is a relatively low number for home births. That being said, that's an incredible statistic, only 8 out of 1,000. And I would imagine that in most cases, the numbers wouldn't be that much higher. So what does it look like for you with the 412 births?
Well, I think overall we had about a 7% C-section rate.
But relative to hospitals, though, 35.
We had about a 15% transport rate. Again, transport rate is higher in first-time moms than multips. We rarely transported. And 99% of the transports that we had from home were non-emergent. I think the only time I've ever called an ambulance to a home birth out of my 412 was postpartum. And it was for babies who just weren't transitioning well. And it wasn't like we were going to put them in the backseat of a car and drive them to the hospital. And sometimes we truly needed it, the ambulance to come. And we would even jump in the back of the ambulance and go along with the EMTs, because a lot of EMTs, unbeknownst to most people listening, they're great at what they do, but they're not trained in neonatal resuscitation. They know how to take care of a toddler. They know how to take care of an adult with a heart attack or somebody who's not breathing. But the whole process is different with a newborn, because it's a whole different way of dealing with resuscitating a baby that's newborn versus a 6-month-old baby. That's different. And they're not really well trained in that. We wish they were better trained in that. Problem, of course, is even if they took the training, unless they kept re-upping the training, because how often are they going to see a newborn baby but that is very important to understand that if you're having a home birth and your midwife or your OB, rarely like me, we are all trained in neonatal resuscitation. And if for any reason your baby needs to be transferred to the hospital, then that midwife or that doctor should go with the baby to the hospital in the ambulance, despite sometimes the ambulance is saying, oh, you can't, especially they never said no to me. There's that hierarchy. I'm an MD. They just deferred to me, but they often don't defer to midwives, and they should, and midwives should never leave their baby. If they insist you can't come in the ambulance, say, no, I'm getting in that ambulance. Right. And if a dad has to step in to help out to make sure that midwife gets in the ambulance, the dad needs to help out and do that.
That's another important question I'd like to tackle later, is like the father's role in birth. I think that's a really, really important topic to discuss. So how many births have you attended, or did you attend, with your conventional training? So before you started involving the midwives at hospitals.
This is funny. I have no idea.
Okay. Would you imagine it's upwards of hundreds though?
Well, in my residency program, I probably saw hundreds, if not.
Okay.
Remember that time I spent at county?
Yeah.
I was seeing lots and lots of births. So, but it's really interesting. Midwives keep records of their births. I kept a log. And the only reason I kept a log is because the midwives I was working with told me to keep a log. Because doctors in the hospital, the hospital keeps records. Doctors don't go home after a birth and then start jotting down in a logbook, or now they type it in. But mine was handwritten because it was back then. By the way, I never went to electronic medical records, even at the end of my career, because my handwritten work was fine. And electronic medical records was something that was supposed to save time, and it was supposed to improve outcomes. And I can guarantee you that it did neither. What it did was it generated a lot of revenue for General Electric and other companies that created electronic medical records. And for these companies that have these rental agreements for midwives and stuff, where they can, for $50 a month, they have this stuff logged. It didn't do anything. It's again, what's called stage one thinking, which is where we're going to put something out there. We're going to do it. We're going to do it before we've actually investigated whether it actually does good, because we think it's going to do good, but we never ask the follow-up question, does it actually do good? And electronic medical records is one of those things. They said, well, we can communicate with, if you're in Cleveland, you can get your records from UCLA. It's like, well, no, the Cleveland Clinic and the UCLA records are not compatible. They still would have to email them over or fax them over. And by the way, a 5-page prenatal record in my handwritten file, if you go to Kaiser in Southern California, it can sometimes be 175 to 350 pages of the same thing, with redundancy over redundancy and cut and pasting and the same labs and the same prose that was written in, repeated over and over and over again. It's not even it's not a time saver, and it hasn't improved outcomes. How can I say that? Because outcomes haven't improved, at least not for in my obstetrical world, the lane that I'm in.
Well, I mean, we were just talking off camera, and the infant mortality rate in the US, despite being inside one of the supposed most technologically advanced, most well-trained, most well-funded healthcare systems in the world, is some of the worst amongst industrialized nations, which is crazy to consider. Like, you would imagine that these advancements, this progress we've made technologically, all these labs, all this monitoring that we're doing, and I know we've already talked about this, but it's just really crazy to consider, would lead to better health outcomes. And if not, then we need to reevaluate. And we don't.
And Alec, the interesting thing about that is, and the thing that worries me a lot, is that we know that the system needs to be changed. We know that needs to be revamping. And the problem is that what happens generally is the people that got us here, the people that broke the system, will be the ones that the politicians and government ask us to help fix the system. Right. The example I use a lot is, you remember the banking crash in 2008, 2009. The banking committee was run by a guy named Barney Frank and Chris Dodd. They made banks make loans to people who really couldn't afford loans, and they did it all in the name of home ownership, and it was supposedly a good thing. And then the banks crashed. And then the government said, we're going to step in and we're going to regulate the banks, and we're going to get rid of the small banks, and we're going to do all this. And who do they put in charge of the regulation for the aftermath of the mess that they made? Chris Dodd and Barney Frank. So I'm worried that what will happen is, when Maha or somebody decides we need to make changes in the maternity care system, who are they going to go to? They're going to go to ACOG.
The same ones that made the issues.
They're going to go to the Society of Maternal Fetal Medicine. The same people that are really what they are is they're industrial lobbies. They're not necessarily there for the benefit of the women in our country. They make policies and rules that make them more necessary and make them more revenue. And if safety happens to happen because of that, great. But it doesn't tend to happen that way, because you have to look at our outcomes. Everything that I discussed earlier about the rising rates of this and the rising rates of that and the rising interventions and all these things that we do, and yet our outcomes are worse. Not only are they not better, they're worse. So there's no evidence of benefit from so many of them, and there's evidence of non-benefit, and yet they continue down this merry path of doing more of the same thing.
Right. It's insane. And that's why I asked the question, like, how many births did you attend with your conventional training versus the 412 that you attended that were home births? And so in your own direct experience, having been intimately involved in both worlds, what is your opinion on hospital birth versus home birth?
Well, there's always the caveat whenever we talk about something like this that yes, some women are saved by the hospital system. And so I don't want to condemn the hospital completely. We need the hospital.
I've said that repeatedly. Like, people will mistake what I say and like, oh, fine, you don't like Western medicine, then avoid hospital. I'm like, I've said a number of times, I repeat this, for true emergencies and true acute care, allopathic medicine is great. I would want to be no other place than inside a Western country if I shattered my arm, or if I was bleeding out, if I was shot by a gun or something to that effect. Of course, there is a place for that.
Right. So again, the C-section rate again in the country was 5% in 1970. Believe it or not, the World Health Organization, another organization that you and I probably don't have a lot of faith in, came out almost 40 years ago by saying that the C-section rate should be somewhere between 10 and 15% in Western countries. And they said that C-section rates less than 10%, the outcomes are going to be a little bit worse. And anything over 15% doesn't improve outcomes at all. Yet there isn't a country in the world that has a 15% C-section rate. And yet they want us to follow, the World Health Organization wants us to basically surrender our autonomy as a country and do whatever they tell us to. But here's one rule that they said that nobody's following. So maybe 15%, maybe 20% of women need the hospital. The problem is the hospital can't financially survive if the other 80% go someplace else. So what we need is a rebirthing of how, excuse the pun, of how birth is managed or looked at in the hospital. Even using the term managed there, that's a Freudian slip. You shouldn't, but how birth is handled in the hospital. And if hospitals want to keep our faith, then they should let women come to the hospital, which, by the way, is an intervention. Just getting in your car and driving, you're going to be putting out adrenaline. You're going to be slowing down your labor. Many women who are in labor at home, every 3-minute contractions, will pack a bag, go to the hospital, go through triage, answer all the things, sign all the forms, and suddenly their contractions are 7 minutes apart. And people don't realize that, yeah, that's what nature would do. And they think, well, something's wrong. And you're here now. We might as well rupture your membranes and start Pitocin and stuff like that. No, if you just leave them alone, they will go back into labor. The problem is the hospital risk managers and administrators will not leave them alone. They won't. They need to generate revenue. They need to control the liability. They need to control everything. And so they will not leave them alone. So in an ideal world, you could have women could go to the hospital and 80% of them could just go into a room with their partner, bring their own lights, bring their own food, bring their own music, and be left alone, not being monitored, just like they would be at home. You can truly make hospital slightly more home-like. What's funny is that hospital administrators, when they had this thing that they wanted to make hospitals more home-like, you know what they did? They put in hardwood floors and nice curtains. But the policies all stayed the same. This is how administrative people think. You cannot replicate at home, but we need the hospitals to somehow stay open for those women that need it. But the difference is night and day.
Talk me through a standard in general home birth, what that looks like versus a standard hospital birth based on your own direct experience.
A home birth with a qualified midwife, a traditional midwife, looks something like this. And we're not talking about free birth, and we're not talking about midwives or medicalized midwives. We're talking about with a traditional midwife, like so many that I know. They have prenatal visits that are more than an hour long, generally, and not the 6 or 7 minutes that you get with your OB, where at an hour-long visit, you get to know the person really well. You can talk about preventative care and nutrition and stress release and sleep and how's your relationship. And, you get to know the kids, you get to know the family, you get to know each other. And that brings down that adrenaline level. That brings up that dopamine level. That brings up the good feelings, which then are bathing your baby, and you're feeling comfortable and confident and not fearful. One of the things that we talk about as a red flag is that when a woman goes to her OB's office, she's usually a little bit nervous. The question is, how does she feel when she leaves? And do you feel more stressed or less? If you feel less, that's a good sign. If you feel more stressed, why do you stick with that? We do it because out of habit and because that's our insurance card, and we're financially trapped. We think we're financially trapped because we don't plan ahead for our birth like we do our wedding or other events. So when you're in labor, you've already had these conversations. You kind of know when to call or text, and you'll text your midwife. And likely when you text your midwife, you're going to get the midwife that's been taking care of you, the midwife that you know, as opposed to, again, the hospital model where you're going to text or call, and you're most likely going to get a stranger because your doctor's in a call group, and maybe there's 7 people in the call group, and you have 1 in 7 chance. The midwife, you have this continuity of care, which I can't tell you how valuable it is. I think people understand that. You always feel better when a friendly face shows up. So you'll text your midwife, the husband will call the midwife. If the woman's calling, she's probably not in good labor. So usually we can kind of tell that things are happening when the husband's the one that's calling or the partner's calling.
That's what I did.
Right. Because if the woman's calling, or if you get to the house and the woman opens the door and offers you a cup of tea, she's not in labor. You turn around, the midwife will turn around and go home. But so we generally, when we come to the house, the door's open, we quietly come in, we set down all our gear. One of the people in the team will go in the room and just kind of listen from far away and not be disturbing, not start a conversation, not bring the woman out of that primitive brain that she's supposed to be in into her cognitive brain, which then disrupts everything. We'll probably take a Doppler. We'll probably listen to the baby for a couple of minutes straight through a contraction to hear them, just reassure us that the baby's fine. We'll make sure that she's been drinking and eating and peeing, and we'll ask the partner. And often they'll have a doula. Home birth moms often have doulas. The doula will have been there probably already. And then we go in the other room, we set up our gear, and we have pretty much the same kind of gear that you have at the hospital. Not so much the tech stuff that's on the wall, but all this pretty much the same meds and the same assistant for respiratory things, assistant for bleeding things, those sorts of things. We have all that. We set that all up, and then we quietly stay in another room. If the woman's in the living room, we're in the bedroom. If she's in the kitchen, we're off somewhere else because we don't want to hover. We leave them alone. And we can tell by the way things are sounding whether things are progressing well or not. Mammals, pretty much human females, make sounds, whatever country you're in, they make these guttural sounds that become more and more like lionessing or roaring. And at some point you can tell when she can't resist the urge to push. If there's any question beforehand, then you may go in and check on them. But you may take a blood pressure when you first get there. But if the blood pressure is normal and the woman is feeling fine and it's not dizzy, then the likelihood that her blood pressure is going to suddenly alter without some physical symptom or obvious finding is so rare that we wouldn't probably take it again until she's postpartum. Whereas in the hospital, they'll have a policy that says, well, we need to have a blood pressure on the chart every 2 hours. So she could be in the middle of a contraction and she'll be wearing one of these things on her arm, which will be automated, and it'll just start blowing up, and it could be right in the middle of a contraction. There's no reason to do that other than some protocol that was written by somebody who doesn't understand birth. If a woman is hypertensive or whatever, or she's bleeding, then you adjust your protocol to deal with that problem. But you don't have an algorithm, which is what hospitals do. At some point, she's going to not be able to push, or you've filled up the water and there's a tub and she gets in the tub, which they'll find very analgesic for them. It's and I know that if you have a sore knee or a sore back and you get in the shower, it feels better. There's a whole theory about the gate theory. I call it the gate theory of pain. It's got a different name now that I've looked into it, but it's the same thing that you do if you bang your elbow. The first thing you do is probably swear, and the second thing you do is you rub your elbow, and that makes it feel better because you're stimulating nerves on the opposite side of your brain that make it harder for your body to determine the area that got hurt. And it's the same thing if you're having back labor and you have water beating on your back, or you have somebody rubbing your back with something called a rebozo, or your husband or your midwife or doula is squeezing your hips or whatever. You can get through that surge and then you get that relief in between. That's what's going on. And when she's ready to deliver, you just let her do her thing.
Right.
And you intervene if there's an issue. If you fear the heartbeat you might be listening more frequently as the woman begins to start to push. But if everything's fine, you just kind of back off and leave them alone and let nature do its thing. And nature does its thing really, really well, especially when a woman who feels safe and is knowledgeable and supported by her partner. That's the ideal scenario for a baby to come out, being bathed in oxytocin and dopamine from the mom and all those other things. And you leave the cord alone and you have immediate skin to skin. If the baby needs attention, you can slip in there and do some things to the baby that you need to, but not all babies need to be rubbed down. Not all cords need to be cut after 60 seconds. That is a made up number. So many things in obstetrics are made up numbers. Age 35, 42 weeks, 24 hours of ruptured membranes. They're all forms of 6 feet apart.
What's the oldest woman you've ever attended giving birth?
51.
51. Really?
My memory is that she had a spontaneous conception.
Wow.
But I've had many in their late 40s.
51-year-old home birth, though.
Yeah.
16 years past what they call quote unquote geriatric pregnancy.
Yeah,
which is insane. Insane.
It's a made up number. It's using 35 as a way to label someone high risk is just foolish. And you can ask the question, when you label someone high risk, do you make them higher risk? And the answer is yes.
I mean, what we know about the placebo-nocebo effect, absolutely.
Correct. You're changing everything about them.
Yeah, absolutely.
In all their conversations with their girlfriends, I'm a high-risk pregnancy.
Right. They wear it as a label. It becomes a label for them to where they're already going to be coming into their experience of birth tense.
And you could ask, why do doctors do that? Well, one, that's just the training they have, but two, it also gives them power and control. And if they want a woman to be induced at a certain point, they can say, well, the risk, if we go longer, there's a higher risk of stillbirth. We never really did get into what high risk really.
We'll get there. I would distracted. Let's talk real quick, just in general, in your experience, what does a hospital birth look like now? Just a standard one. What do we see?
Okay. So what's going to happen is that you're given instructions written that told when to call the hospital or when to call your doctor on call. But let's just assume either one. And it'll be, your contractions are 3 to 4 minutes apart for at least 2 hours, and each contraction's lasting like 40 to 60 seconds. Well, not everybody who's having that happen is in real good labor or not, but that's what you'll be told. You'll be told if you break your bag of waters to call. Now, in our world, the home birth world, if you break your bag of waters, we kind of like to know about it. We'll ask you some simple questions like, baby moving, fluid clear, any blood? Nope. Okay, go back to bed. In the hospital, you'll be likely be told if your bag of waters breaks, you now have a stopwatch that has started and you need to come in because we need to make sure the baby's okay. And so contractions every 3 to 4 minutes for 2 hours, then you'll come to the hospital. And when you come to the hospital, you've already kind of described what happens when you come to the hospital. You come in, certain hospitals have a triage area. Some you come through the ER, depends on time of day. You're asked a lot of questions. You're made to go change into a gown. We put in a bed. They are going to immediately put the belts on you. They're probably going to draw blood on you. Again, the question is why? And the argument will be, well, we want to know what your hemoglobin is. It's like, well, I'm fine. I'm not bleeding. What my hemoglobin is 10, 11, 12, 13. What difference does it make? Well, we want to have a tube of blood in the blood bank just in case you need a transfusion. Well, why? What's the odds of me needing a transfusion? Well, it's pretty small, but if we need it, we need it. Well, what happens if I was in a car accident or I came in with a gunshot wound? Well, we'd type and cross you really quickly, or we'd give you O negative blood. Well, why can't we do that? But see, there's no RVS code, billing code for not drawing blood or for not sending blood to the blood bank. So they routinely do it because we don't do that at home birth. We don't draw blood. We don't make people pee in a cup. Why do they make you pee in a cup when you come to the hospital? Again, it's almost a routine thing. Oh, they want to drug screen you. Well, they need my permission for that. And, we want to just make sure you don't have protein in your, well, I'm not preeclamptic. My blood pressure is normal and I feel fine. So they routinely do these things without any thought. They'll start an IV. Why does a woman need an IV? She can eat and drink. She's not coming in she's not MPO prior to knee surgery. All right. She can eat and drink. Why are we starting an IV? Well, just in case. Just in case what? Doesn't it make everything more likely when you start to plant these seeds in their brain? They'll be put on a monitor. If they're in good labor, they'll probably request to do a vaginal exam. Most women will say yes because they don't know any better. Especially if your membranes are ruptured, this is a bad idea. But they'll do a vaginal exam and then they'll decide, okay, you're in labor, so they'll put you in a labor room. And then you'll meet your nurse, and the nurse will come in and take your vital signs again, and all the things that you had in triage will be done again, and there'll be some charting, and the nurse will be sitting there typing into the electronic medical records, and the lights will be on a little bit, and eventually—
Under fluorescent lights in a sterile room that is cold and white and not warm and welcoming, by the way. That's another piece.
Eventually, they'll leave you alone for a little while, and then you'll hear noises in the hallway, and the people will come back in periodically for these routine protocol-dictated procedures that need to be done. And eventually, because they need you on the monitor, you won't be able to move, so you'll be uncomfortable. So you'll ask for something for pain. You'll say, "Can I get in the shower?" He said, "No, we can't let you get in the shower right now. We've got to watch the baby." And it's like, no, you don't have to. Women don't know that. One of the tricks that midwives and doulas have taught me is that, they can't prevent you from going to the bathroom. It's kind of inhuman to do that. So you just go to the bathroom and you labor in the bathroom. And the nurse will say, "Are you okay in there?" "Yeah, I'm fine." "Can we get you back on the monitor?" "I'm not ready yet." And you just stay in the bathroom if you have to. If it's that kind of a hospital. Again, we're talking about typical, not, there are hospitals that are coming around and doing things, but even going to the hospital is still an intervention. And then you'll get an epidural. And then what does an epidural do? Well, an epidural will slow down your contractions generally. And it may even cause the baby's heart rate pattern to be a little bit funkier. And they'll make the doctor or the nurse nervous. So then they'll want to turn off, they'll say you're not progressing fast enough because your contraction's spaced out. They'll want to start Pitocin. And then they start Pitocin. And then if your membranes aren't ruptured, they're going to want to rupture your membranes probably before they start Pitocin. These things have variations of order of how they do these things. And eventually what happens is now the baby's disconnected from you because you're now numb. You're not helping the baby anymore manage its way down the vaginal canal. You're not communicating musculoskeletally, hormonally, electromagnetically, things that we don't even understand.
Right.
You do.
Right.
But I don't. Those things are all shut off now because mom is just snoring. Mom's comfortable. She's sleeping. But every 3 minutes or so, because she's on Pitocin now, baby's still getting squeezed. The baby's heart rate begins to become uncomfortable for the nurses that are watching it. And they'll do another vaginal exam that's probably not necessary. You'll only be 6 centimeters dilated. They'll say, your baby's not tolerating labor. I think if things don't change soon, we need to do a C-section. And you'll end up with a third of women or more having a C-section when they didn't need it at all. That's typically what goes on in a hospital. Now, can women have perfectly healthy, normal, unmedicated vaginal births in the hospital? Yes, they can. But they have to know ahead of time what's going to happen so they're prepared to say no to all the things that they're going to want to do to you. Now, some of these things are done out of just habit. Some are done because they're protocol. Some are done purposely because they generate revenue. But most of the time, it's not necessary. How do I know that? Because I've been doing this for a really long time. I've lived in both worlds. I have this unique perspective of spending 28 years in the hospital and 12 years in the home setting and seeing the differences, even in my own practice, of how I did things differently.
Did you have a lot of cognitive dissonance?
I didn't even know what that was back then, but I do now. And yes, cognitive dissonance plays a huge role.
Because I have a friend, I guess an acquaintance who's a high school acquaintance of mine who's an OB-GYN now. And I try to have these conversations with him, and he ended up blocking me on Facebook. But I mean, it's like, I think the cognitive dissonance surrounding coming to the conclusion that your education and training was overwhelmingly incorrect and leading you to the wrong direction is a lot for people to face.
And you've been doing unnecessary things to women for 20 years. These are not bad people.
No,
so
good people.
The realization of having dissonant cognitions, which are two thoughts that conflict with each other. That's what it means. Yeah, it's really hard for a person that's been doing something for 20 years to realize that these are good people. So the idea that they've been doing the wrong thing, like I had to deal with that when I figured it out. When you're in the middle of cognitive dissonance, you don't know it. It's like someone has to point it out to you. And that's what happens, is that people can't get along and people disagree. And that's why they cancel you, or they troll you, or they do other things, because you're making them uncomfortable, as opposed to saying, I may disagree with you, or I don't think that that's reasonable, or I think breech birth at home is dangerous, but I understand why women are choosing it. And I'm glad that you're there to offer that to them. And I wish that more people knew how to do breech birth. The fact that my hospital doesn't allow it is because no one knows how to do it. We should probably try to change that, but I'm not going to badmouth it. That would be much more reasonable. But that's generally not what happens. I have a great example of cognitive dissonance.
Please.
Okay. So remember we said the World Health Organization said the C-section rate should be 10 to 15%. Let's say 15%. And let's say for the sake of argument, we'll give the United States the benefit of the doubt and say the C-section rate in the United States is 30%. Because you can see where I'm going with the math here. Okay. We have a little under 4.4 million. We have a little under 4 million babies born every year in the United States. So if the C-section rate is 30%, that means that 1.2 million women are having cesarean sections. If it should be 15%, that means that half of those, or 600,000 women, are undergoing cesarean that don't need it. That's 600,000 unnecessary cesarean sections. If there were 600,000 unnecessary gallbladder surgeries or mastectomies or knee surgeries, not only would people be upset, but insurance companies would certainly be upset because they're paying for that. Yet we don't hear a peep about that for whatever reason. So we are doing 600,000 at least unnecessary major abdominal surgeries on women in the United States this year, and no one is saying anything. So where does the cognitive dissonance come in? And the cognitive dissonance comes in if I were to ask you, so if we're doing 600,000 unnecessary C-sections every year, who's doing them? Because no doctor goes home at night and says to their spouse, hey, honey, guess what? I did 2 unnecessary C-sections today. Every C-section a doctor does, he thinks is necessary, yet we know half are unnecessary. So how do doctors deal with that? Well, first of all, they don't. But if they're asked the question, they're saying, well, that's the other guys over at that bad hospital over there that are doing it. But you ask those guys, and they're pointing back at you and saying, no, it's those guys over at that hospital. 600,000 unnecessary C-sections, and no one admits to doing them. That's what I can define as a really perfect example of cognitive dissonance. Now, you can believe that the C-section rate shouldn't be 15%, that it should be 30% or 40%. But in many countries, it's 50, 60, 70, 80%. How do you defend that? How do you say that it's okay in South Africa that 70% of women are having C-sections? In Brazil.
Pretty high in Brazil, right? Yeah.
Brazil, Armenia.
Yeah.
How do you defend that? Are you actually saying that the species has changed in one generation or maybe 2 generations to mean that babies are bigger, women are sicker, women are fatter, pelvises are shrinking? No, none of that possibly could explain this astronomical rise in cesarean section rate that is being ignored by people like the American College of OB-GYN and the Society for Maternal Fetal Medicine. Their efforts to try to lower the C-section rate are pathetic. And generally they involve more technology. Right? We're going to put more monitors on babies. We're going to screw things into their heads. We're going to do more ultrasounds. We're going to find babies and get them out before they're too big and all that stuff. No, all that's done is continue to make matters worse. These are the people that are in control. And not only are they in control, but they're trying to take over the profession of midwifery, which I don't even know if you want to call it a profession, the tradition of midwifery. Midwife is a term now that doesn't really mean anything anymore. There are some states and countries that have co-opted the term. There are traditional midwives in Canada that can't use the term anymore.
No way.
Yeah, they have to be called, they call themselves traditional birth companions or attendants. Yeah, you cannot call yourself a midwife in Canada unless you've been licensed by the state to be called a midwife. And the same thing's happening now with doulas. There are states that want to license doulas. Licensing is a big catch-22.
For generations, our ancestors lived in harmony with nature, thriving on a nose-to-tail approach to nourishment. Organ meats, often called nature's multivitamin, were a staple, providing essential nutrients that supported energy, brain function, skin, gut health, and reproductive vitality. Yet today, these deeply nourishing foods are largely missing from modern diets, leaving many of us unknowingly depleted. Let's be real though, most of us aren't eating organ meats the way our ancestors did. Whether it's the taste, texture, or simply a shift away from traditional foods, we've lost touch with this vital source of nourishment. And that's where Paleo Valley's grass-fed organ complex comes in. It's an easy way to reconnect with ancestral wisdom and replenish the nutrients we're meant to thrive on. Sourced from grass-fed cows on small regenerative farms in the US, this blend includes liver, heart, and kidney, freeze-dried to preserve their full nutritional integrity. No fillers, no synthetic processing, just pure, bioavailable nourishment. Those who incorporate the grass-fed organ complex notice more energy, balanced moods, and renewed vitality, sometimes within days. If this speaks to you, you can explore more by visiting the show notes or heading to paleovalley.com/thewayforward. And in this case, forward is fully spelled out. So paleovalley.com/theway, FORWARD. And a 15% discount will be automatically applied at checkout.
Yeah, what's your opinion on that? Because I've interviewed on one hand Emily Saldea, but then I've interviewed on I won't say other end of the spectrum, but other people like Emily Stanwyck. I've had Ayla Cuenca, of course.
I know all of them.
Yeah, and then I don't know if you know Veda Ray. I've interviewed her recently too. There's several people that I've interviewed, and everyone has I won't say differing opinions. I would say one that stands out is Emily Saldea. She is completely against licensure in any form. What are your thoughts on it in general?
Well, if people think that licensing makes you better, they're fools. Because all the bad things that we've talked about for the last hour and a half have all been done by licensed physicians who are board certified and members of the American College of OB-GYN. So they have all kinds of letters after their name and they're still doing stupid stuff. So licensing is a way for the state to control you and actually then funnel you down the path they want you to go. And if you don't do things the way the state wants you to do, if you speak up, say, against vaccinating pregnant women.
Or if you're a midwife who wants to attend a birth that's 36 weeks.
36 weeks, or you're very trained in breech delivery. You've been doing breech deliveries for 30 years and suddenly the state outlaws midwifery for breech delivery. You now can no longer do that if you're a licensed midwife. And if you're unlicensed, then you risk potentially, in some states, being arrested. Right. So I don't think that licensure proves anything.
And licensure is not synonymous with education. That's the piece that I think people need to separate, is that, yes, licensure comes with some positive education in many cases.
Well, it means you made it through nursing school, medical school,
right?
Hairdressing school in California,
right?
Because they're licensing hairdressers in California,
right? Exactly.
You learned how to fish.
Yeah, you get a fishing license. Literally, like quite literally, you get a fishing license.
No, it doesn't throw anything about say anything about prowess. You know, there's the old joke about what do you call somebody who graduates last in medical school?
What do you call them?
Doctor. You've not heard that. You've not heard that before. Yeah. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you are good at what you do or anything like that. As I've said before, all these things that we've discussed today, whether you agree with all of them or partial of them, they're all done by people who generally are considered the smartest people in my profession. and all the outcomes have been getting worse.
Yeah.
From the smartest people. So maybe we're going down completely the wrong path. And the only way that people know how to control something is to license it and to manipulate it. And that's what they do. And when something has power over you, even if things are beginning to fall apart and they realize that their outcomes are not any good, tyrants don't just walk away. They don't suddenly say, Stu, I heard you on the Alex podcast, and you're right. I'm going to stop doing what I'm doing in obstetrics, and I'm going to start doing home birthing, or I'm going to go learn breech delivery, and I'm going to be. They're not going to do that. What they're going to do is they're going to become more tyrannical until finally it collapses of its own weight. And eventually what happens is that the women, the consumer needs to be, force the marketplace to change. Because you will not get the people that are running the system because it's working perfectly well for them to change. They're making the best money. They've got the most power. They've got the most say. They're not going to give it up.
You want to talk about high risk now?
Yeah.
Finally come full circle.
Can I? Okay.
Hour and a half later.
So I think I started earlier with saying that high risk doesn't have a definition. There is no definition of high risk. High risk is defined by what makes the doctor uncomfortable. Period. So what do I mean by that? Well, they will consider something like breech delivery to be high risk. But what is the actual risk in breech delivery? Let's go through some numbers. Okay. The best guidelines on breech delivery are from the Royal College of OB-GYN 2017 guidelines. And that's because they talk about the risks of breech delivery and the risks of cesarean for breech delivery. Interestingly enough, the American College of OB-GYN guidelines talk about you need to counsel women about the risk of breech delivery, but there's nothing in their guidelines about counseling about the risks of cesarean. To that pregnancy, that baby, and that mom's future babies, not mentioned. It is mentioned in the Royal College guidelines, and they look at it and they've rounded their numbers because no numbers are this perfect. But they say that the risk of stillbirth, which is everyone's greatest fear, with a vaginal delivery of breech baby at term, and again, I'm assuming these are properly selected because the problem is that there are no standards for breech delivery, and one hospital may do them differently than another hospital. And so it's really hard to compare studies, but the risk that they give is 2 per 1,000 of stillbirth. And the risk at C-section is 1 in 2,000. So the risk is 4 times greater, which sounds horrible. Not horrible, but sounds bad. From 1 in 2,000 to 2 per 1,000. But we're making a false comparison. We're comparing vaginal breech delivery to cesarean for breech delivery. What we need to do is compare vaginal breech delivery to head-down vaginal delivery. What's the risk in a head-down vaginal delivery? And the risk, according to the Royal College, is 1 per 1,000. So 1 per 1,000, 2 per 1,000. So if you do 1,000 breech deliveries, you're going to lose 1 more baby than if you did 1,000 head-down deliveries. Nobody's telling you to section all head-down babies. By the way, they're saying that head-down babies is twice as risky as a cesarean for the baby. But nobody's saying that. But for breech, they're saying section all breeches. So we're sectioning 1,000 breeches to save 1 baby. Now, if that's your baby, that makes sense. But what are we doing to the other 999 mothers and babies? That's not part of the equation because in every research paper in obstetrics and gynecology, obstetrics, put gynecology aside, because we're talking about outcomes. The only outcomes the primary outcome in every one of those papers is neonatal morbidity and neonatal mortality. It's not, how's that baby doing at age 2? It's nothing like that. It's not, how did that mom do? How did she do in her subsequent pregnancy? Did she have a placenta accreta? Did she have a ruptured uterus? How was breastfeeding? How was bonding? How much postpartum depression did she have? None of that stuff's measured. It doesn't matter. I have this saying that I always say, which is that all that matters in the medical model is a live baby in the bassinet. How the baby gets there and what happens to that baby, that mom, and that mom's future babies doesn't matter to the medical model. It may matter to the individual physician, but it doesn't really matter to the medical model. And I would tell you that it probably doesn't necessarily matter to the individual physician if he's really honest about it. Because when a woman has a ruptured uterus and loses a baby and maybe even loses her life, everybody's, looking at what did the midwife do? What did the doctor do? Who screwed up? But one of the things they're not looking at is why did she have that first C-section in the first place? And I can tell you, most of the time, if you look at it, you'll find that it's one of those unnecessary C-sections. Right. And no one's looking back and saying that, Jesus, if we would have done a breech vaginal delivery on that woman and she would have accepted the extra 1 per 1,000, her second baby would be alive right now. But it's not. So when doctors counsel about risk, they generally use what's called relative risk, which is that 4-fold increase. They don't talk about actual risk. Actual risk doesn't mean anything if you don't know what the denominator is.
The same thing with the Pfizer clinical trials, how they came up with a 95% effective. They use relative risk reduction instead of absolute risk reduction.
Right. So if something was 95% reductive, instead of it happening 1 in 1,000 times, it happens 1 in 1,950 times or something like that.
Right.
Yeah. So they make it sound like it's this huge, wonderful thing. Another example is VBAC. VBAC is something that's always considered high risk. So for whatever reason that woman had that first C-section, if she has a VBAC, they're going to tell her that her risk of the scar separating is so high that it's probably better for her to have a repeat C-section.
That's what my wife was told.
Even though she might want a third baby or a fourth baby, and even though that risk of that C-section carries more risk to the baby and mother than a VBAC does statistically. Because what is the actual risk with a VBAC? And the numbers are, again, these are rounded numbers, but the quoted risk of a scar separating is about 1 in 200. 1 out of every 200 VBACs, the scar will separate. Now, often that's called uterine rupture. That's a horrible term because it conjures up that image of a tire exploding on the freeway, which is not really. By the way, I finally saw one once. You always see the rubber on the freeway and you wonder.
You actually saw it happen?
I actually saw
I've never seen it happen.
I actually saw a truck blow out one of its tires. Fortunately, it has 18 wheels, so it was able to pull over to the side. But I actually saw one once because you always see rubber all over the place.
You do.
Right.
So
anyway, that's a bad terminology because that's not generally what happens.
Right.
But when it does happen, it can be catastrophic. So how often is a scar separation catastrophic? And the answer is somewhere, depending on the papers you look at, somewhere between 5 and 16% of those. So let's take the higher risk and say 16% of ruptures will end up with a bad outcome. So if you're counseling a woman, you're going to tell her that before you go into labor, your risk is 1 in 200 and 16% is 1 in 6 times 1 in 6 or 1 in 1,200. That's how statistics work. If it happens to you, that's different. But because to any individual woman, it's either 0% or 100%, but it's about 1 in 1,200. So they're telling a woman that 1 in 1,200 something happening is high risk because they're going to label every woman having a VBAC as a high risk. What is 1 in 1,200? Well, that's the same risk as a woman just under 24 years of age of having a baby with Down syndrome. Would you tell a woman who's 24 years old that she's at high risk of having a baby with Down syndrome? And the answer is no. Right. It's the same risk. You could also take many other risks that doctors do to you, like inducing a woman against an unfavorable cervix because she's diabetic, even though she's well controlled, probably carries more risk than a VBAC. Yet that will be labeled standard of care, and this one will be labeled high risk. So often what doctors tell you or suggest to you carries more risk than the thing they're suggesting it for. For instance, a woman who's over 35 will be labeled high risk. They'll tell you that your placenta if you're over 35, your placenta might give out, and we should probably get that baby out at 39 weeks. So they'll want to induce you at 39 weeks. Which carries more risk? Being over 35 and perfectly fine otherwise, or having an induction at 39 weeks? But which one's going to be labeled high risk? Over 35 is. I have a series of these things when I teach my course.
This is great.
I go through all kinds of things like this.
It just shows the absurdity. It really does. It just shows the absurdity of calling, like my wife was labeled high risk. Like it's insane. It's insane. She was completely fine.
Correct. Which is higher risk? Giving birth to a big baby or your doctor's suspicion that your baby is too big?
Right.
So women give birth to 10-pound babies all the time. But if your doctor thinks you're having a 10-pound baby, you're going to end up with more risk than the risk of having a shoulder dystocia with that 10-pound baby, because you're going to be induced and you're going to suffer from all that sort of thing. Or they may tell you that this baby's so big, I think you should just have a primary C-section. So which is really higher risk? So that's why I'm saying high risk isn't a number. High risk is something that your doctor is uncomfortable with. And then they'll label everything high risk. If you're on thyroid medication and you've been on it for 10 years, it goes on your problem list. You are now high risk because you're hypothyroid. I got called one time. I love this story because a woman caught me because you can't get all the OB out of yourself.
I appreciate you acknowledge that, by the way.
Oh yeah. You have this training and it's in the back of your mind. When you take a history, the way we're all trained to take a history, whether you're a nursing student or a medical student or a midwife, there's something called the chief complaint. Why are you here? And then you ask questions about that. And then you go into past medical history, past surgical history, family history, review of systems, meds, allergies, that kind of stuff. That's typical history taking. When a woman would come to see me in my office for a first-time consult, even when I was doing home birthing, she would come in she wanted to have a home birth and she just wanted me to be there, or she had a breech, or she had twins. And after I talked about the first thing that I don't really want to call it a problem, but it's called a problem list. By the way, that's the psychology of doctors is they should have a diagnosis list. It shouldn't be called a problem list. But you call it a problem list, it's already framing your mind. But she'd come in for a normal pregnancy and I would get to the part about past medical history and I would say to her, so Becky, do you have any other medical problems? Which is how you would say it. So Becky looks at me and she goes, what's the first one? Then I realize what I'm saying. Do you have any other medical problems? Which means that I'm defining her pregnancy as being problem number one. I have no idea that I'm saying that. It's just coming out of my mouth. Kind of like saying I manage this, or, you're a patient, not a client, or whatever. These terms that we use to funnel people into a box. And so from that point on, I was very careful about saying, do you have any medical problems? Instead of other medical problems. But doctors, on their standard form that they use, and pretty much most OBs use the same forms, there's a thing called a problem list. And the number one problem on the problem list for a pregnant woman is
birth.
That she's pregnant.
Yeah.
Right.
Pregnant. That's insane.
It's number one. And so it changes the whole psychology of everything. Yeah. And that's how doctors are trained. God bless us. That's how we're trained. But we're trained again, as I said, in the last 50 years, 45 years, by maternal fetal medicine specialists. What is their specialty? High risk obstetrics. What prism do they see all birth through? They see it through the prism of high risk. ACOG, in one of their own guidelines, says pregnancy itself is a high risk condition. That is a direct quote when they're talking about influenza in pregnancy. So they talk about, because pregnancy is a high risk condition, that flu could be worse in pregnant women. But pregnancy isn't a high risk condition. Pregnant women are designed by nature to be resistant to a lot of things. Yes, some things are more likely to happen to pregnant women, but more likely doesn't mean likely. And higher chance of something happening doesn't mean high risk. But yet, that's the way you'll be manipulated by people who may not even know they're manipulating you, because that's the way they've been indoctrinated in their training and through their programs. And now, since doctors are no longer shepherds, as I said very early on, they're essentially sheep. I feel for doctors. They've let it happen to themselves. Partly it's their own fault. But a doctor now works a shift, gets paid a salary, and is an employee. And when you're an employee, you care less about something than when you are responsible for it. If you own your own restaurant, you care more about it than if you're just working at some chain. It's just human nature. So we have doctors right now who are just going through the motions. And it's tough on them because a couple things. They don't get to see the culmination of their work. The culmination for me is and part of the reason I chose obstetrics was because I liked longitudinal care. I like caring for people over time, as opposed to being a surgeon who takes out your appendix and never sees you again, or a doctor in the ER who sews up your forehead because you split it open, something like that, and never sees you again. I liked taking care of people over time. Well, the culmination of your work as an obstetrician is to be there when the baby is born. You take care of a woman for 7 or 8 months and someone else is on call, and you end up on call delivering people you've never met before. There's a disconnect there.
Yeah.
And one of the most obvious things that was pointed out to me just recently by my old partner, Howie, we were having a conversation on the phone, and he was talking about, he still goes to Cedars after all these years. He's still there. And he says that all the docs we work with are either retired or they're now just employees. All the guys that used to be solo practitioners. And by guys, I mean women too. That guys is my Midwestern thing, the way I talk. So
I say you guys as well.
Yeah, it's a way I talk. They're all employees now. And he mentioned the fact that if you go see doctors now at a clinic, this is what it looks like. Before I get to that, let me tell you what my office used to look like when I was in private practice. I had a nice corner office. I had windows. I had a beautiful desk and a bookshelf and a countertop that matched. I had artwork on the walls. And I had like plants in my office. I had pictures of my wife, my kids on the shelves. Now I know that, I told you that I'm having knee surgery. I've been to the doctor a few times, pre-op and all this stuff. I walk into a generic office. On the door is a sliding nameplate. And the name slides in and the name slides out. Okay, there are no diplomas on the walls. There's no paintings on the walls. There's no pictures on the walls. There might be a poster put out by the American Medical Association or something about the flu vaccine on the wall. The desk is a desk you get at IKEA. The chairs are these plastic chairs that you might get at some cafeteria. And this is the doctor's office now. They've taken somebody who maybe had too big an ego years ago, but was actually responsible for his own patients. And you've now put them into this kind of a office where tomorrow somebody else will be sitting in there. Nothing personal about it. Nothing. And that's what you've done to them. And you wonder why outcomes are getting worse. I mean, there's so many reasons, but there's also human nature is not designed to work as hard or care as much when it's somebody else's football.
Right. When you don't have that personal relationship with them.
Or that stake in the game.
Right.
And by the way, my fiduciary duty, my ethical obligation was to my client. When you're a doctor that's employed by some big organization, who's your ethical and duty responsive to? It's now conflicted. Because yes, you want to tell your woman that it's okay to go past 41 weeks. But you know what? Your policy doesn't allow you to let people go past 41 weeks. So now you have to skew your counseling.
How many home births would you say have gone past 41 weeks that you've attended?
I have no number.
See, that's where it's like the 40 week number is such an arbitrary number. It really is.
It's completely made. It's a completely made up number. A due date is a mistake in the first place. And then to make laws that say that a midwife can't take care of somebody if they're before 37 weeks or after 41 weeks or 42 weeks, whatever it is in your state, just shows how unaware these people are of nature's design. We don't exactly know when people conceive, and we don't exactly know when they're going to give birth. And to go back to my apple analogy, which I want to attribute to Michelle O'Don, who passed away this year, very beloved person in our field, who wasn't an obstetrician, by the way. He was a general surgeon, but he changed the course of history. He describes, pregnancy as like apples on a tree. Some are ripe earlier than others. You don't pick them all on the same day. Yet somehow we had a paper that came out called the ARRIVE trial, which said, oh yeah, it's beneficial to induce all women at 39 weeks. And hospitals who love control and love to have sort of policies adopted it with no thought about, is it a good idea? Is it right? Well, we can lower the C-section rate by 3%. Yeah, from 22% to 19%. This is not a model that any hospital can possibly follow. It doesn't apply to the way we practice obstetrics, and yet they decided to take it in because it gave them more control of the scenario. And by the way, generates more revenue. And then what do? They vilify home birthing.
This is what I was wanting to talk about next.
The problems we have in obstetrics are not because 1% of women are choosing to give birth at home. We don't have a 35% C-section rate because 1% of women are giving birth at home. That math doesn't add up. Yet this is where they're focused. It's kind of like the old thing from The Wizard of Oz at the end where it said, pay no attention to that man behind the curtain. Just look at the flashy thing over here. That's home birth. And pay attention to that. And the fact that we are doing poorly worldwide, we're pretty much dead last in Western countries in maternal and neonatal mortality. Pay no attention to that. It's those 1%ers, those home birthing. We gotta do something about those free birthers.
It's so interesting. So I know an article just came out like on the whole free birth thing. I don't want to comment on that necessarily, but I did have a separate reporter from The Guardian contact me wanting to write a story on my several interviews that I've done on birth. And I didn't respond. I haven't replied at all. I don't know if the article ever came out. I didn't go look. But it was very clear in the questions that were asked of me that he was attempting to frame home birth in a very negative, very fear-inducing light. And I think we're going to see this happen more and more as more and more women wake up to the problems with birthing in the hospital system, because so many women are hearing stories of people like my wife and so many other women out there who've done both, who've had a birthing experience in the hospital and then had a birthing experience at home, and show the stark contrast between the two and how much better the home birthing experience is. And because, like you said, the tyrant isn't going to so easily let go of control, they're going to do whatever they can to fearmonger and trash home birthing to instill the fear of God back into women, to pull them back in.
This is, and then you can ask yourself, why now? I mean, why did that story on free birth come out now? Why did the New York Times did a story on continuous fetal monitoring? Why is this stuff coming out now? And part of me wonders is, there's a lot of transitioning going on right now, but who controls the finances of medicine? And who can influence the Guardian to do a story like that? Or the New York Times like that? And even though they're kind of opposite ends of the story, you always have to ask yourself the question, why is it coming out now? Who's publishing it? Who's financing it?
Cui bono, who benefits?
Yeah, cui bono, who benefits? Who advertises in The Guardian?
Pharmaceutical companies.
Yeah, not midwives, not home birthers.
Kaiser Permanente.
Permanente, the American College of OB-GYN, who, by the way, they're taking federal. I mean, it's so incestuous.
Yeah.
That our government gives money to these organizations that have terrible outcomes. As I said earlier, if we're going to make changes in the system, you cannot ask people from ACOG and the Maternal and Fetal Medicine Society to be the sole people that are going to help you change that. If you're a politician and you're listening to this, please, please, please do not make that mistake. They're welcome at the table, but you need to have other voices. You need to have voices from the midwifery world. You need to have voices from people like me. By the way, I am not getting rich, and no midwife I know drives a Porsche. So midwives aren't getting rich either. Midwives do it because it's a calling for them. They can only take a certain number of births per month because they provide such personalized care. The medical system is based on volume because it's all revenue generated, and the more volume you can take. But if you do volume, you can't give personalized care, and you end up with worse outcomes. It's so obvious that it's hiding in plain sight, the problems with the system.
So if you had control, if you had a magic wand to redo the education and the practice of an obstetrician and a gynecologist from the medical establishment, what would that role actually look like versus what it looks like now?
Well, I think it would have to take some time because it would have to start with retraining. And you really can't teach an old dog new tricks unless they're forced to financially to do it. Why don't, I and Breech Without Borders, we go around the world and we teach breech and twin birthing skills. And 95% of our attendees are midwives. Why don't doctors come? And it's a rhetorical question. I know the answer. They don't want.
Do you get some doctors to come though?
Every now and then.
That's good.
Yeah. But most of them who come are just curious because they know when they go back to their hospital or their call group, they're going to prohibit them from doing breeches anyway. But what's really important about anybody who's doing obstetrics and maternity care is that even if you don't do breech delivery and you're not comfortable with it and you want to section all breeches, which is wrong, but it's what you want to do, there are times that a woman's going to come into labor and delivery with the butt or the foot sticking out of the vagina. And if you know what to do and she's completely dilated, you can have that baby out if it's in trouble in 15 to 30 seconds. And if it's not in trouble, you can just let her deliver. And you know that. Maybe you don't want to do that, but it's a lot worse for the mother and the baby to push the baby back up inside, gas the mom under general anesthesia and doing a crash C-section on her, only then to deliver the baby in what position? Breech. You're just pulling it out through the abdomen instead of the vagina. And so, but why don't they want to learn that? And some of it is just laziness. Some of it's cognitive dissonance. And some of it is a realization that even if I learned it, I'm not going to be able to use it anyway. So you can't just go into the system as it exists now and change things. I could go in and change one hospital and probably drop the C-section rate in that hospital to less than 10%. But I couldn't change the system because there aren't enough practitioners out there who know how to do things differently than the way they're doing them now. So it would start with medical school and mainly residency programs and changing the way we're convincing doctors that pregnancy itself is a high-risk condition, and changing that whole theory about that and teaching them more about nature's design and the importance of the microbiome and the importance of bonding and delayed cord clamping, and that not all pregnancies have pathology, and the overuse of technologies not serving us well. Just by going through the numbers, saying, okay, so now every woman has 3 ultrasounds. Are our outcomes better? No. C-section rates have gone up 700%. Are our outcomes better? No.
Can you pull that closer to you just a little bit and then continue?
Our induction rate is tripled in the last 30 years. Are our outcomes better? No.
Did you say tripled?
Yeah, it was 10% in 1990.
That is insane.
Yeah.
That's insane.
Again, CDC numbers. So take it for what it's worth.
Like on that note, the CDC put out a really interesting study during COVID. This is a completely separate topic, but of the 540,000 people who were hospitalized and subsequently died with COVID in this one study that they were looking at, the second strongest risk factor for death was fear/anxiety related disorders.
Was what?
Fear/anxiety related disorders.
That was the second
strongest risk factor for death.
What was?
I don't remember the p-value on it, but it was.
That was the strongest risk factor.
Second strongest risk factor.
What was the first one? Just being in the hospital.
Probably.
Sorry.
It's just so. The point I'm getting at though is like they can still put out some good data. It's just that data is oftentimes obfuscated, whereas the data that reifies the medical establishment and the allopathic system is then, plastered all over.
I've published 4 papers, and 2 of them I think are really important. One was on home breech birth, one was on home twin birthing, and I tried to submit them both to the Green Journal, which is ACOG's journal. And I still remember I had a conversation with the then editor of the journal about my stuff, and she said, Stu, still remember her saying, Stu, they're not ready for your stuff, which is essentially a way of saying that we're going to filter what gets published, and we're not going to publish stuff that goes against our narrative. And we know that's the case when it came to during the years of COVID, is that the articles about all the problems were not published. And even false articles were published in this formerly of reputable Lancet and New England Journal. The control over that sort of thing is so intense between the insurance companies, the pharmaceutical companies, and big medicine, that the idea of changing the way things do, what would I do? I would redefine certain things. I know how we influence people through basic economics. You want more of something, you subsidize it. You want less of something, you tax it. So you want to lower the C-section rate, pay more for a vaginal delivery to the hospital and to the doctor than you pay for a cesarean. Simple thing you could do. And you could say to a hospital, if you have a C-section rate below 30%, you get this many dollars per delivery. If it's below 20%, you get this many dollars per delivery. So incentivize them. People will say, well, that's coercive. Yeah. I guess that's how it works.
Coercive for the good side, right?
But that's what they're doing now. They're getting paid more for cesarean. What's their incentive to lower their cesarean section rate? So financially, you change it. You'd have to change the tort system in the United States. I mean, England and Canada have a loser pays system. We don't hear much about it anymore because whatever happened, they're still getting sued in Canada and in England too, but not to the extent that we do here. Most negligent cases, most bad outcomes are not negligent cases. They're not malpractice. But any bad outcome, especially when the biggest fear for most doctors is a brain damaged baby, because it's the lifelong expense. The only way that a family can make ends meet is to sue. There's no other compensation form. I'm not saying we should form a fund from the government like we did for the vaccine company. We don't want to do that, but we want to figure out some other way so that there's so much less defensive medicine. Then you can stop ordering all these tests that you do for defensive medicine. All these ultrasounds that we do. I once did a podcast and I called it, How Many Ultrasounds Does It Take to Make a Baby? That was the title of the podcast. And it takes none.
Yeah, none.
But how many women have none? And yes, if you have no ultrasounds, you're going to miss something, and you're going to have some outcomes that you could have prevented. But how many bad outcomes do we have because ultrasounds were misread, or there's false positives, or things that are questionable that make the woman, again, worry the whole time and get over-tested?
Or again, the safety of ultrasounds themselves, like that is severely understudied.
Yeah, and then the misunderstanding of how to treat it. A great example was Anna and Jorge was a couple that were from Minnesota, and they had monodi twins, which are what we call identical twins. Identical twins are at risk for certain problems, but if they don't develop those problems, then they do just fine. And you can determine whether they develop those problems pretty early on in their pregnancy. And surveillance is reasonable up to a certain point. What happened with these people is that they were at the University of Minnesota, which is funny, it's my alma mater, and they were told that they should have their babies at 32 weeks. Now, at 32 weeks, babies weigh about 3.5 pounds. So if you have your babies at 32 weeks, how much time are they going to spend in the newborn intensive care unit? And that's probably going to be 4 to 6 weeks at least. That generates a ton of revenue. I'm not saying that's why the maternal fetal medicine doctors suggested that, but they suggested 32 weeks for all their babies who have monodi twins, which doesn't even follow the ACOG guidelines, which is like 36 to 37 weeks, which also is a false number. But they were seeing the doctors every week for scanning, and the bill for each time they were scanned was $3,000. They had 10 ultrasounds. Do the math.
Yeah, that's insane.
They found me through whatever, and we did a consult online, and they were perfectly reasonable to go longer. They had family in Arizona. They came down to Arizona. They had their twins at 38 weeks and 2 days, 12 minutes apart in the tub, vaginal delivery at home with monodi twins. If they would have followed the advice of the University of Minnesota, a premier place, their kids would have been born 6 weeks earlier. To what cost to those children? To what cost financially? To what loss to the parents? All that stuff, simply because they were following some algorithm. So back to your question about how do you change all that? You have to change the financial rewards. You have to change the tort system. You have to, start education younger, as we talked about, so that women understand that these things aren't normal. And then you have to change the leadership in the organizations and the priorities that they're facing. And these are monolithic tasks, if that's the right word, to get them, because they're not going to let go. So I wish I could wave a magic wand and have it change. But if I can change families individually to ask the right questions. And one of the things that, as long as I just mentioned twins before, one of the things that I really want to emphasize when every podcast I go on is that when you get your scans with twins, all scanners in the United States and pretty much every country have built-in measurements and algorithms to measure these things in graphs that they plot these things on. Twins grow slower after about 26 weeks than singletons do. Everyone knows that. Yet you will be told that your twins are falling off their growth curve in the third trimester, and you will told your babies are growth restricted when they're not. So when you have twins, you want to ask your OB or your maternal fetal medicine doctor who's seeing you, can you plot my baby's growth on a twin growth chart? It's a very simple thing to do, but it requires them to make an effort because it's not built into the machine. They'd have to do it manually. And it's that simple, because does this make any sense to anyone? About 44% of twins at 36 weeks will be considered growth restricted because they're measured on a singleton growth chart. Doesn't make sense to anybody, yet this is what maternal fetal medicine doctors do. Very rarely do they ever use a twin growth chart. And they like the diagnosis of growth restriction. Matter of fact, they changed the diagnosis of growth restriction to imply that babies under 10% are growth restricted. Now, you're telling me that 10% of all babies in the United States are growth restricted? Because that's what 10% means, I think. If I'm doing my math correctly, that's what it means. It's not possible, because some people are 5'2", and some people are Samoan, and yet babies of 5'2" Filipinos and 6 feet tall Samoans are measured on the same graph on the chart. Why doesn't this bother anybody in charge?
Right.
How do you change a culture? when everybody's just going about their business and nobody, and again, the bigger they are, the less there is responsibility. Tell you an anecdote. I stayed in Airbnb recently, and it was November and it was cold and we had no heat. And so I called the host. They said they'd send somebody out. Somebody came out and said they can't fix the furnace. So what I would do as an individual Airbnb owner was I would show up at their house with space heaters. What do? Nothing. I called Airbnb. I got somebody in India who couldn't help me. And then they argued with me that they can only offer me a refund this much. And I couldn't speak to anybody and get any satisfaction whatsoever. If you were just renting from one person, that person would be somebody you could talk to and you'd get satisfaction from them. So when you get something that's huge, like the healthcare industry and these big corporations, like the Kaisers, not picking on Kaiser, but it's one that I know well because I was in Southern California. You can't get resolution. You can't.
Well, it's also because they can defer responsibility, like constantly. They can just deflect and defer responsibility to someone else.
Yeah, you may have seen the movie. You may be too young. You may have seen the movie The Rainmaker. Did you ever see the movie Rainmaker? It's when Matt Damon was young. Is Danny DeVito. It was about an insurance company denying a claim on a kid who had leukemia and he dies. And turns out that they sue. And to make a long story short, they find, spoiler alert, they find that the company had a internal policy book that they passed out that said deny all claims. Because if you deny all claims the first time around, 20, 30% of people are just not going to resubmit. You've just saved yourself hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions. So why wouldn't they make it hard for you to solve the problem or to get satisfaction when you really have no place to go anyway? We need to, that's one of the things that I would change. I'd get back to the more personal thing, like the midwifery model of care, which again, the medical model is trying to destroy. Because when you have a local midwife who takes 5 patients a month, 5 clients a month, she knows you can reach her, she's got 24/7, she's got her phone on, all that stuff, okay? That model there aren't enough midwives to make that model work, but that's one of the things that I would do. But not would I just train more midwives, I would train more traditional midwives. If you start just training more midwives, you're going to get medicalized midwives because the midwifery training programs and the American College of Nurse Midwifery and other organizations, they're all becoming much more medicalized and they're losing what the meaning of being a midwife really is with women. They've lost it. And
becoming more pathological versus physiological, essentially.
More interventionist. Yeah.
Interventionist.
Yeah. And more fearful. I hear stories, again, because of my public persona, people write to me all the time and I get emails all the time about things that doctors or midwives tell them and they tell them with such certainty, but they're either wrong or they're not the only choice. And yet they're given with this authoritative knowledge, this authoritative position. I'm the white coat person and you're the lowly patient. And, to use the example. And there's something called the medical gaze. And the medical gaze is that the way doctors are trained now, they're trained to look at the affliction, not the afflicted person. So if you come in and you start talking about the fact that you've got a thyroid problem, they start going through a differential diagnosis in their mind right away. And they only have 6 minutes in order to do it. So because they can't control their own schedules, so they function right away and they're ready to write a prescription for, levothyroxine or some Synthroid or something like that, as opposed to doing what NAPRO doctors do and whatever is going back to the root causes of trying to figure out what's going on. And they don't look at the person with the thyroid problem as a person. They look at as them just having an affliction. Mm-hmm. And so the afflicted person gets ignored. And with the model as it is, you don't have time to get into what's going on in her life that might be contributing to this because you just don't have the time because the system works on volume. I would change that as well. How? I don't know.
It's going to take more conversations like this to continue to happen. Really, I think change is primarily going to come from people rather than from any government.
Well, you figured it out and you changed your whole course.
Right.
And people will listen to this and there's so many great podcasters out there and people will listen to this and it'll resonate with a few people. They'll look into it. Some of them won't change because they're not comfortable with it, but some of them will change. Not everybody is going to have a guaranteed good outcome in either path. That's one of the things you have to understand about life in general, but about pregnancy for sure, is that there are uncertainties and bad things happen. And sometimes there's no explanation for it and no matter where you give birth. And sometimes bad things happen and there's a perfectly good explanation for it. It's because it was iatrogenic.
And I think the thing that's really important to highlight in that, I know we've said this a number of times, but it's important to emphasize, in my opinion, especially for the soon-to-be moms or women who are wanting to get pregnant or women who are wanting to have their next baby or whatever, is that the quote-unquote bad outcomes with respect to home birth are going to be highlighted and plastered everywhere relative to the bad outcomes that occur in a hospital system. And that's just the reality. They're going to fearmonger about the bad outcomes in home birth and then sort of brush aside any of the bad outcomes that happen in a hospital setting. And that's just the reality.
Yeah, another story, real briefly, because these are the way people will remember these things. I was called to a birth once for a woman that had been pushing at a birth center for like 3 hours and the baby wasn't coming down. They called and asked me if I could come and put a vacuum on. Not my client. I did that in LA all the time. And I said, yeah, but I'm an hour away. It'll take me an hour to get there. By the time I got there, the baby's head was on the perineum and it just took a little bit of something called fundal pressure and the baby came out. And the baby needed a little bit of help in the first minute, but then it was breathing on its own. It had good color. It had good heart rate, but it had no tone. And, 20 minutes go by. We have a pulse ox on the baby. Its breathing's fine. Its O2 oxygen sat is great, but it has no tone. So there's something wrong with this baby. So we call paramedics. They come over. We're sitting there talking. We're looking at the baby. And, we just decided the baby's better off going to the hospital because we don't know what's wrong with this baby. But in hindsight, the fact that it had no tone, there was probably something neurologically wrong with this baby. And that's probably why the mom couldn't push it out. Baby wasn't helping. And babies help coming out. It's easier to push out something that's got rigidity than it is to push out something that's soft. This baby wasn't helping. So the baby went to the NICU. The mom got dressed. The hospital was like 5 minutes away. The mom went over to the hospital to the NICU and the baby's in the NICU and the nurse in the NICU, probably having a bad day, says some stupid comment about fucking home births.
Wow.
Now, first of all, it wasn't a home birth. It was a birth center birth. Second of all, the birth had nothing to do with this baby's condition. But she was conditioned, the nurse was conditioned to just be anti-home birth. But this mother, and this is a composite memory, in her grief, said something to this nurse. She said, I count 13 babies in the NICU. Where did the other 12 come from? And they were all hospital births. How come she doesn't say fucking hospital births? And some of those babies were 7 and 8 pounds. They weren't all the extreme preemies that, by the way, need to be in the NICU. And by the way, NICUs do, the caveat we started at the beginning, NICUs do marvelous things. MFMs can do marvelous things. OBs can do marvelous things. It's just that it's overshadowed by the unmarvelous things that they do. And the idea that this woman in the midst of her grief was able to actually point that out to exactly what you're saying. They'll point out the home birth bad outcome, but there's a lot of babies in the NICU that didn't need to be there, and they were there because they were induced or they were intervened upon in the hospital setting in a way that was inappropriate and unnecessary.
Do you care if I ask you some questions from the audience now?
Of course not.
Okay, let's do it.
I'm having fun.
This is great.
Well, yeah, it's, this isn't meant to be patronizing anyway, but it's fun sitting here talking to you.
I appreciate that. I like to make it fun. I like to make the guests comfortable to just be themselves and chat. This has been great.
Well, your surroundings are great. So thank you for having me.
Nice vibe.
And
nice
you know
vibe.
what? I do, again, for people listening, a live format interview is actually so much better.
That's why I started doing it. I was interviewed by Luke Story for his podcast in person. And after sitting down with him, I was like, why don't I do that? I'm in the Austin area as well. I mean, a lot of people want to come out here. Like, let's do it. So it's been phenomenally better. I do some virtual, but only if the guest will not come out and I really want to have them on. But I like to do in person.
Yeah, and ours are all virtual because Bliss is in a different location than me, and
that makes it difficult.
Yeah, and it's difficult, and I don't have the budget to help. I mean, people will come and I pay their own way and all that other stuff, but it's a bigger production than I.
It is a much bigger production. What makes it nice though is this is not birth related at all. But what makes it nice is renting an apartment, which is obviously what I've done here, that the guests can come stay in. It just makes it so much better.
I'll tell you, it was great. I slept like a baby last night because I didn't have TV, didn't have anything. It was great. And Reese is great. And it's a great setting. So.
Shout out to Reese off camera.
Most healthcare today operates on an outdated mechanistic model, treating the body like a battlefield rather than a self-healing system. You wait months for an appointment only to receive a rush diagnosis that labels you rather than truly understanding your unique health. Even in holistic health, many practitioners rely on endless lab tests and supplement protocols, addressing symptoms instead of the root cause. And the result? Another prescription or supplement regimen that merely suppresses or masks symptoms rather than facilitating true healing, whether the imbalance was physical, emotional, energetic, or a mix of all three. And that's why Dr. Tom Cowan co-founded the New Biology Clinic, to offer something radically different. As one of the most respected natural health doctors in the world, Dr. Cowan has spent decades challenging conventional medicine and advancing a deeper understanding of human biology, water, and natural health. His work isn't just about rejecting the mainstream, it's about offering a more truthful, biologically coherent approach for healing. The New Biology Clinic recognizes that health isn't about fighting disease, it's about restoring balance. You're not a diagnosis, you're an individual with a unique story, and healing should honor that. With virtual consultations available worldwide, the clinic offers a flat-rate monthly membership that gives you direct access to practitioners who take the time to actually listen. Members also get exclusive health live streams, a resource library, and live sessions covering everything from biofield tuning and breathwork to movement and meditation, all designed to support whole body healing. And if you're not ready for a membership, you can book a one-time appointment, sign up for an enrichment-only membership for the healing modalities alone, or schedule a free connection session with one of the care team members to see how the New Biology Clinic can help in your specific situation. This isn't about keeping you dependent on doctors. It's about making you sovereign over your health. Head to newbiologyclinic.com and use code THEWAYFORWARD, and that's spelled The Way, FORWARD, for $50 off account activation, or just head to the show notes for more info. If you're a member of The Way Forward, email hello@thewayforward.com for $150 off. Your body already knows how to heal, and New Biology Clinic helps you remember.
Okay, so this first question is regarding Cytotec and induction. So just ask him about induced labor and the medication Cytotec.
Okay, so Cytotec is a form of something called misoprostol. It's a chemical that's used to soften and ripen the cervix. Just so people understand, it is off-label. There was a big thing during COVID, how, oh my God, hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin are off-label. We can't do off-label drugs and stuff like that. Yet I can tell you that there's at least 9 drugs that I can mention that the American College of OB-GYN recommends that are all off-label, including, by the way, inducing with Cytotec or inducing with Pitocin. Augmenting with Pitocin is on-label. It means somebody's in labor and their labor slows down. Inducing with Pitocin is actually off-label. So Cytotec is a way for a person who needs an induction. Always make sure, by the way, if you're going to have an induction, that you actually need it. Make sure that the doctor explains it to you to the well, that you understand it. Because if there's any question that you have it, first of all, the doubt isn't good for you. But second of all, you probably don't need the induction. And also, if they tell you, yeah, we want to induce you, but we can't do it till next Tuesday, it's probably not a real urgent induction. So what Cytotec does is it softens the cervix. Sometimes it will cause the uterus to start contracting on its own. And that may be all you need. Other times it's used for the first few hours, and then cervix dilates enough that maybe they can use something called a Foley catheter or Cook catheter, which dilates the cervix about 3 to 4 centimeters. And then they consider either rupturing membranes or starting Pitocin. It's all fairly invasive. You think about it. It should be used sparingly. It was overused for a while and it was used during VBACs, caused a lot of problems with uterine ruptures, which then made people more nervous about doing VBAC, which they shouldn't have. That's the wrong interpretation of using this chemical causing ruptures to say that all VBACs, you shouldn't do them at all. But that's what stage 1 thinking will do. Do you understand?
Totally.
Yeah. Okay. I'm looking at your face.
Totally. Well, for me, what comes up when thinking about any of these things, like Cytotec, when we talk about Pitocin, epidurals, any of the interventions that are done, is how do they truly assess the risk that this poses to children or to growing fetuses, to
They
babies?
probably haven't.
That's my point, is like, if we ask about any of these substances, have they truly been tested in a double-blind randomized placebo-controlled trial against an inert placebo in any way? No. The answer is no. So to conclusively state that any of these are truly safe and effective, it's the same.
And it's not considering the fact that nature's design was designed to go into labor when baby and mom are ready. Now,
Exactly.
Of course, obviously there are those cases where, mom is preeclamptic or some other problem where the baby's better off on the outside, and an induction is probably a better option for most women than just going to a straight cesarean. But we have to understand that when women are counseled about induction, they should be counseled that, we're interfering with nature's design and we're not exactly sure how that will affect your child down the road, nor how it will affect your body and your ability to breastfeed and other things like that.
That'd be true informed consent.
Because, they don't give true informed consent.
No.
Right.
No, not at all.
No. I mean, and let me just go off on a tangent on informed consent for a second. True informed consent is almost impossible. Informed consent should be like reasonable informed consent, like what's reasonably likely to happen. And the example I give is when I teach my classes, I ask about, can you give true informed consent? And people will say, yeah. And I'll go, do you ever use lidocaine? And I'll go, yeah, all the time. We all use lidocaine when we're repairing a tear or something like that. I say, do you tell them that they could die from it? And everybody goes, well, no. Yeah, but that's in the package insert. So, I mean, you're not really giving true informed consent. You're giving reasonable informed consent, or what, because otherwise it would take you 4 hours to go through informed consent for every little thing that you did. Have you ever read the package insert? Holy shit.
Right.
So
it's a good point.
Right.
It's a really good point.
But what's reasonable to one practitioner may not be reasonable to another practitioner, which is why you have to be discriminating in how you pick your practitioner.
Yeah.
If you feel like, go back to that thing, if you feel comfortable and if they answer your questions, they look you in the eye and they're not typing into their EMR with their back to you or have 1 foot out the door, and you feel better after you leave the office and stuff like that, and they ask you and they remember your name and they remember your husband's name and stuff like that, then yeah, that's somebody you probably want to stay with. But if they don't, or if every time you go in, you got somebody new, why stay in that practice? Don't do it because you're financially stuck. Plan ahead for these sorts of things. Save money. Have a health savings account. This is a great opportunity to use it. Even if you have to go to this hospital, you could hire a midwife to do some of your prenatal visits. Even if you didn't plan to have a home birth, hire a midwife to come to your house. They'll come to your house. You pay them a couple $100. They'll come to your house spend an hour and a half, 2 hours, and you'll get lots of information that you'll never get from your doctor. Your doctor may give you a piece of paper and a handout, stuff like that, but there's no talking about it, stuff like that. They consider handouts or ACOG pamphlets to be informed consent, and it's not. We've
covered this one a little bit, but I still think it's important to speak to more directly. What is a necessary versus an unnecessary intervention? That's a big question. I know.
It's in the eyes of the beholder, I guess.
In your experience.
Yeah. Well, what are indications to intervene in a pregnancy? True growth restriction, not a baby just being under 10% on one ultrasound or one femur length or something like that, but a baby that really is falling off, that is showing signs that its intrauterine environment is no good anymore. That's rare, but it's a reason to intervene. A woman with preeclampsia that is getting worse. Preeclampsia does not mean she has to be delivered immediately. Doctors will say you do, but it depends on your gestational age. If you're 34 weeks and you have mild preeclampsia, you can probably buy some time. If you're 39 weeks and you're having mild preeclampsia, there's not a whole lot of benefit to waiting too much longer, so that it's nuanced. Placenta previa or a placental abruption are reasons that, you need to, those things need to be intervened upon. Certain mothers' medical conditions might be, if mother has clotting disorder or a stroke or other things like that. Again, these are rare, but just because a woman is diabetic doesn't mean she needs to be intervened upon. It depends on how well that diabetes is controlled. And diabetes these days now, even type 1, these women are generally fairly well controlled in my population. Now, again, I was dealing with upper middle class on the west side of Los Angeles. So it's different than in other parts of the country and other parts of the world. But most type 1 diabetics now have a continuous glucose monitor and an insulin pump. So they can look at their phone and they know what their blood sugar is, and they probably have better hemoglobin A1Cs than a lot of us. So just because a woman has the label of diabetic, they're going to be funneled down a path in the medical model. But diabetics that are poorly controlled, they might need to be intervened upon. Same thing with hypertension. Not all hypertensives certainly have preeclampsia, they don't. And not all hypertensive needs to be delivered early. You'll be told that by your maternal fetal medicine specialist who want to be scanning you twice a week to check the baby's outcome. But everything, if your blood pressure is fine, and whether or not you're on medication or not, doesn't mean that you can't go past 39 weeks, but you'll be told that. So this is a very tough question because there are reasons why interventions are necessary, but they should be individualized and it shouldn't be algorithmic. And my brethren in obstetrical world, they do things on an algorithm. Every diabetic's treated like this. Every set of di twins is treated like this. Every breech baby is sectioned. This is how they manage care. They think it's going to limit their liability. They think it's going to be more expedient, and it certainly is, to schedule a C-section at 7:30 in the morning on a Tuesday and be out by 8:20 is a lot easier than possibly having to be up all night on a Saturday night. And the pay is about the same, and the liability is a little bit less, or so they perceive. And the reimbursement might not be different for the doctor, but it's saving a lot of time. And the hospital makes more money and the hospital's happy. I think the hospital prefers a person with a 7% C-section rate or a 30% C-section rate. Which does the hospital prefer?
The latter.
The latter.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
I mean,
because they think anybody with a 7% C-section rate is probably taking too many risks.
Yeah.
And they don't generate enough revenue. And there's not enough anesthesia charges. It's all backwards.
So would you say those same sentiments apply to someone who is strep B positive? And then also, would that apply to the Rho antibody?
Okay, let's talk about strep B first. Group B strep is a normal inhabitant of about 15-20% of people. It's transient.
This is my point. Yeah, I get so frustrated.
It's transient. It can be, you could have it cultured
today. This is a rhetorical question
and not cultured tomorrow.
Yeah.
Can it cause a serious infection in a baby? Yes, it can. Is it predictable which babies are going to have that? No, it's generally not. So the question is what you believe. They believe that treating, I'll just use a number of 100 women, it's actually far less than that. But let's just say treating 99%, that way I don't have to do numbers. Treating 99.9% of women with antibiotics is a lesser evil than one baby suffering very severe consequences of congenital sepsis. Again, if that's your baby, then that's true. The problem is what are our antibiotics doing to the other 99.9% of babies? And the medical model doesn't consider antibiotics to be a negative. They don't consider there's to be any downside. For whatever reason, the microbiome isn't really discussed much in medical textbooks. It just isn't. And yet our immune systems are 80, 90%, whatever number you want to make up, part of done from your gut bacteria. Your gut makes your vitamin K. Your gut makes stimulates your immune system. It does all those things. When you take antibiotics, you mess that up. So it isn't a win-win scenario when you give antibiotics to prevent GBS. And most women with GBS do not get a baby that gets GBS infected, whether or not they knew it or not. It's extremely rare happening. It's terrible when it happens. And because of the way the system is designed, they don't want that terrible outcome. So they'd rather babies and moms suffer downstream once they're discharged from the hospital than have a problem in the hospital, which they can be sued for. So that's the thing with the GBS. I altered myself over the years. I initially thought that antibiotics for GBS made sense. And then I learned from people like you and other people that, antibiotics have their downside. And so now we try to give people informed consent. And we talk about the pros of antibiotics and the cons of antibiotics and the pros of not treating and versus treating, and let families decide. And I will tell you, when given information, no matter how bias-free we try to be, everybody has a bias. So they know my bias. But when given information, most women will choose in our world not to take antibiotics because they know people choosing home birth are already, they're ahead of the class. They already know these things. And some people will choose to do it. But I will tell you, if you have a home birth and you get antibiotics at a home birth, it's probably less risky for your baby than if you're in the hospital and get antibiotics. Because in the home, yeah, you may be affecting your microbiome and the baby's microbiome, but your dog and your husband and the other kids and all that, they have your bacteria. So they can be skin to skin with your siblings, with your mother, with your husband. They can do that. Where in the hospital, the first bacteria they're going to be exposed to, probably because they were GBS positive, is they'll be taken to the nursery for observation and they'll be colonized with whatever's on the blankets and other things that go into the nursery, which we know isn't the right thing to be colonized with. Nature designed a baby to be colonized with mom's bacteria. That's why the stupidity of what I used to do, which is wash off a woman's bottom with betadine prior to a vaginal delivery. And there are places that still do that.
Yeah, it's insane. It's insane. You know, and the deeper question there is, like, why has that strep bacteria proliferated in the first place? Because when we look at bacteria and fungus in nature, it proliferates for an intended purpose. Like it has a purpose to be there. And I think that by just wholesale wiping it out, it's doing a great disservice down the line, just as you said. I mean, I know my wife was quote unquote strep B positive, and I also, you know, in hindsight, I would have liked for her to, okay, let's test the next day and see what happens. Let's test the day after that and see what happens. And she was administered 6 rounds of antibiotics during labor, which is absolutely insane, and then ended up in C-section. So we've had to, after the fact, remediate the gut issues that my oldest son has had as a result of that, which it's just insane.
I'm sorry to hear that. You know, the US is probably the only country that still screens for GBS. European countries, they treat symptomatically. So they'll treat a woman in labor with a fever. They'll treat a woman in labor whose baby starts to develop a fast heart rate called tachycardia. They'll treat if someone has prolonged rupture of membranes, but they don't automatically treat because they had a culture done at 36 weeks that said that it was positive for GBS. They do a lot of things in Europe that make a lot more sense than us when it comes to vaccines as well, but that's not our topic for today. But yeah, so why did they still do it here? I guess the Society of Maternal Fetal Medicine always wants to err on the side of what they consider to be caution. But I don't think it's cautious. I just don't think they have a concept of what they're doing.
Second part, Ro antibody. Yeah.
So RhoGAM is a pooled blood product, which is a problem in 2025, almost 2026, because there's no screening for spike protein, which is a whole different thing. It is pretty much screened for HIV and for hepatitis and stuff like that, so you don't have to worry about that. But it's a pooled blood product. And what it's given for is when a mom is Rh negative and the baby inherits an Rh positive, which is a marker on the red cell, inherits Rh positive from the dad. If somehow mom gets exposed to some of baby's blood while she's still pregnant, that can cause her to be sensitized to the Rh. She'll make antibodies to it. Those antibodies will cross the placenta and they will attack the developing fetus. Now, it doesn't usually affect the first baby if it happened in the first pregnancy. And again, that happening is very rare. But when a mom gives birth, there's sometimes potential for mixing of blood. The placenta could shred a little bit, and some of baby's Rh positive blood could get into mom. And rather than testing mom's blood for baby's blood, which could be done, something called the Kleihauer-Betke test, not very specific, but it's a test that could see if there's a significant amount of fetal blood in there. They think that Rh negative moms that give birth to Rh positive babies should get RhoGAM. And up until this question now about spike protein, I was all in favor of that because it does potentially protect them against, because if she does get sensitized, even though it won't affect baby number 1 very much, in subsequent pregnancies, if she has another Rh positive baby, that baby could be seriously affected. So it makes sense. By the way, Sarah Wickham has written a really good book on this. I don't know if you've ever had her on, but she's in England, but she's written some really good books on
Sarah Wickham?
Sarah Wickham.
Okay.
I'll give you her information.
Yeah, that'd be great.
But she wrote one on vitamin K as well. But the giving of RhoGAM at 28 weeks to all Rh negative moms, even when dads are Rh negative, which means the baby, it's impossible for the baby to, unless there's been some hanky-panky, which there generally hasn't, is still done. It's still recommended automatically. I've talked to a lot of women who said they never checked my husband's blood type. So that's lazy. So they just give it at 28 weeks. The problem is that the 28-week thing has never been tested for efficacy. Of course. And you're giving Rh antibody to the woman, which is going to cross, some of that's going to cross the placenta. So that is going to theoretically attack some of the baby's red cells inside the baby. No one's ever looked at that to see whether that causes more jaundice or more problems or anything, because no one studied it. It was just felt it's a good idea to give it after birth because it does potentially decrease the rate of sensitization. So if it's good to give it after birth, we might as well give it to 28 weeks because those few that get sensitized in that last trimester. But this gets back to my whole point about the other thing. There's no money in not giving RhoGAM. There's a lot of money in giving all Rh-negative women RhoGAM. And you're giving something that has never been tested for safety or efficacy at 28 weeks. It was just an idea that caught on partly because we're erring on the side of caution and partly because it generates more revenue. We're going to do it. You have to, I know I've beaten this horse to death several times today, but money motivates these people. It is what motivates it. It's not like the commercials on the radio or the TV tell you that they really care about your health. Hospitals and healthcare systems do not care about your health. They care about making a profit and keeping their doors open. And if you happen to get healthy besides, that's fine. By the way, yesterday I was watching some stuff while I was sitting here, I was here last night. I was watching some stuff on my phone, and I was watching an old TV show called Elementary. It's about Sherlock Holmes and Watson. And every commercial was for a pharmaceutical product. Rinvoq, Fabrismo, the one for Crohn's disease, I can't remember the name of it. Every single one. So it's all about the money. So that's the thing about RhoGAM. If you Rh negative and you have an Rh positive baby, it's something to really think about, but you have to look into it because now I'm not so sure about the safety of the product itself. Right.
What is your opinion on, and I just have a few more, so it's not like 10 more. What is your opinion on pap smears and breast exams?
They're mostly not necessary, but I'll tell you.
Would you say that that's your general answer for most of these things? It's like mostly not necessary. Well, it depends
what you're asking, but yeah, I bought the sales pitch that annual mammograms, annual pap smears are what are needed. ACOG was pushing pap smears. The American Society of Radiologists was pushing mammograms. Only after years in practice did I begin to start to question things, and I started to look into that as well. And if you are married and have never had an abnormal pap smear, you probably never need one. If you want to get one every 5 years, fine, but it's probably the likelihood that you're suddenly going to develop something, because cervical cancer is a sexually transmitted disease related to the human papillomavirus. Almost always. There are rare exceptions, but doing it routinely creates a lot of false positives, which then leads to more biopsies and colposcopies and LEEP procedures and stuff that are probably not necessary. The body does heal itself. If you have an abnormal pap smear and you waited 6 months, good chance that your body, if you were taking care of yourself, good chance your body will fix that. So we overdid it with pap smears, and the same thing with mammograms. Annual mammograms is completely unnecessary. It's probably detrimental. But we were sold a bill. We were told that mammograms save lives. Well, who's going to question that? But then there was a study out of Canada, which was amazing, because Canada, they can do these things because they have this socialized medicine. And they looked at, more or less, I'm paraphrasing, but they looked at about 50,000 women over 20 years, which is a long study. And they looked at, in half the women, they got annual screening mammograms, and half the women didn't. And I think they all had breast self-exam. And we were told that mammograms pick up cancers earlier than breast self-exam, and that early detection saves lives, right? So you'd expect after 20 years that the group that wasn't getting mammograms would have higher death rate. They did not. It's the same death rate. The group that was getting mammograms did have higher problems with certain things, though. They had more biopsies, more mastectomies, exposure to all that radiation. If the benefit was life saved, there was no benefit. So I think that routine screening of mammograms was probably not a good idea. I think, like anything else, you do individualize your care. And if somebody has very dense breasts and you can't tell, and you want to do thermography or ultrasound or mammogram, that's fine. But to do it, to say routinely, it's, send out a little card, say it's time for your annual mammogram, is old medicine that needs to be tossed away.
Love that. Especially the thermography piece, because I know there's a lot of like alternative non-invasive approaches to look at these things.
There's other things too that I'm not, being out of clinical practice now, I'm not really keeping up on gynecology. I keep up on obstetrics. I read more than probably most of my colleagues on the obstetrical side. But if there's an article about ovarian cancer or something like that, I'm not reading that anymore. Right.
Okay. A couple more. Is that good?
Yeah.
You feeling all right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So this one is a really good question, actually.
I'm a nerd.
Okay. I love it.
Right. I mean, this stuff, again, this is just right up my, if you want to talk about LA Kings hockey, we can do that. I can't even talk about my Minnesota Vikings anymore. They're like it's the worst team ever right now. But birth is my other thing that I like talking about.
Got it. We'll come have you back on to talk about the Vikings a little bit. Maybe the Minnesota Timberwolves and Anthony Edwards.
I'm a long-suffering Viking fan. I've been a fan since they started in 61. So that's 64 years.
Yeah.
No Super Bowls.
Yeah, the Randy Moss era though, so that's good.
We did
it.
Yeah,
fun to watch.
we were. Yeah, don't remind me of Gary Anderson's missing his first field goal of the year against Atlanta. I know. Yeah.
Oh man,
it's tough. It's been. I have my buddies that I text during Viking games, and it's like the second quarter yesterday. They turned it off.
Oh man, bad. So, what do you think is the role of men in birthing, especially as a man who's an OB-GYN? Yeah. Let's hear it.
It's huge. Partners. I mean, most partners are going to be men. So let's just stick with the traditional. Again, I like the traditional family, even though mine isn't traditional anymore. I'm divorced, but I think that the traditional role is a male and a man and a woman. And I will tell you this, that a man who partakes in the course of pregnancy, who goes to the prenatal visits with his wife, who goes to pre-educational counseling before pregnancy, who takes an active interest in it, who says to his wife, I'm feeling a little awkward now. I don't really know what is it I can do for you. Has good communication skills, talks to his wife to find out what it is she needs. Don't presume anything. Do things sometimes without asking. Be there when she's ready to go into labor. Go to the classes with her and then show up in labor. Be there. Do whatever she wants you to do. You have a birth plan. And a man who witnesses his wife give birth will have unbelievable respect for her. A man who's there to support her, a man who maybe even catches his own baby, is much more likely to be a better father. I don't need a study to tell me this. I'm waiting for somebody to say, what's the study on that? Is better father, a better husband, more likely to stay in the marriage. And a lot of times fathers feel like awkward. They're very awkward about this. Again, our culture thinks that, that vagina stuff, that's really, it's not for me and like that. And so we need to change that culture. And then you also look at in the hospital model, you asked me the difference between home and hospital, and I didn't even go to this point. So I'm glad you brought this up at this point, because in the home, the husband's an integral part of the whole process. In the hospital, they're often pushed aside. They're disempowered. And sometimes they're made to wear some blue jumpsuit with some boofy hat, makes them kind of look even more stupid than they feel. And when their woman is getting coerced or getting bullied or something's happening that's against her birth plan or against her wishes, and he doesn't speak up, she sees that, she realizes that, and she often will never be able to look at him the same way. Because a woman's job not a woman's job. A man wants his respect from his woman more than just about anything else. And when a woman loses respect because you didn't stand up for me, you watched that person do a vaginal exam on me and didn't say anything when I didn't want it, how can that woman then look at that man the same way? On the other hand, if the man stands up for his wife, she'll have greater love and respect for him. So it's a time where you can just take a marriage that may even be having a little trouble, and you can do a lot of repairing with that. Plus, it's the greatest event you'll ever have in your life anyway.
It's incredible.
Is the birth, first of all, witnessing it, but then, holding your baby for the first time and automatic nature's design with the bonding and the oxytocin that you're sharing and all the things that you can't visualize that you're sharing in that moment with the three of you. And if your other kids are there, then even better. But there's that sacred thing that goes on between a husband and a wife that that many of us we're unaware of, and that is not nurtured whatsoever in the hospital setting. As a matter of fact, a husband that stands up in the hospital for his woman is labeled as a troublemaker.
Right. I know for me, like having experienced birth in all facets, one, like I said, home birth, one birthing center, one hospital birth. My role, as you said, was much more involved in the birthing center and then also at the home birth. And the way I look at it, and this is very generally speaking, is that as a man, my job is to create the safety and security so that the woman can fully release to nature and trust her body in the birthing process. And also as a man, when you have a birth plan that you set forth with your wife, you have to be the one who understands what is a true, I can't do this, I need some intervention, versus her saying, I can't do this when she's in transition. You know what I mean? And there's a difference between the two. Like if you aren't properly educated on that, you might take her saying, I can't do this when she's just in the middle of transition to mean, oh, she literally can't do this. And you have to know and understand and try to stick to your birth plan as much as possible and really create that container of safety for your wife to fully, again, release to the experience of birth.
That's so important what you said about them creating that safe space. I mean, that's a man's role. Now, what's really interesting about this whole conversation we've had is we've talked about nature's design. Well, nature didn't design for what you just said. Nature designed for women to give birth by themselves alone in a safe place. The problem is culture doesn't give women the safe place to do that anymore. So we've adapted to it by needing the males. We're the only species where the male is anywhere near.
Sounds like a good argument for free birth.
Yeah, it is, if we can get past the fear mongering and the other issues that go along with that. I would have, this is not even controversial to say this, but if you took 1,000 women and had them free birth and 1,000 women that had them hospital birth, who would have worse outcomes?
I would imagine the hospital birth.
I don't know.
I'm biased.
I don't know. You'd lose some babies. You'd lose some babies at home. You'd have hemorrhaging. I mean, again, we're not talking about free birth to the point where you just deny that you need to call an ambulance.
Right.
But having nobody at your birth versus having an operating room 60 feet down the hall and, nursing changing shift and all these medical people and all this equipment here. If our outcomes were really good in that setting, then that would be an easy one to argue, but they're not.
Right.
And so I'm not saying anyone's going to ever do this study. They'll find it unethical. They'll never do the study, but I don't know that you need a study to look at outcomes. I mean, some women should not be free birthing. They have problems. They should not be doing it. But then you always talk about the root cause. It's like, you have to understand, why do women choose free birthing? Not because they're stupid. It's because they've either learned through the hard way that the hospital just let them down terribly, or they just don't trust modern medicine in general.
I think
and that's a sad statement, by the way.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. But I think there is a strong argument to be made. And this should almost go without saying, but it kind of doesn't in the whole, I won't say the free birth world itself, but a lot of the discussion surrounding it, that if you are going to free birth, you need to be incredibly educated, like truly educated in physiological birth. And it's not because, how do I put this? It's because we've been so miseducated. That's the issue. Like, again, this is a normal physiological function of the woman's body. The problem is, there's so much conditioning through fear and conditioning on what birth looks like. You look at any movie that depicts birth, and it depicts it as some super fear-inducing event, as an emergency. Like that's what it depicts it as. And you have to undo all that conditioning and then re-educate yourself on what a normal physiological birth looks like, and also what are the warning signs to actually look out for. And I think there is a strong argument to be made to have a midwife present. I think, correct me if I'm wrong on this, you may know the answer, that elephants actually sometimes act as doulas and midwives for each other.
Yeah, there are other mammals that the other females protect the space.
Yeah, I think there's nothing wrong with that.
I think that, again, it gets down sometimes to just trusting a woman's intuition. The medicalized birth system does not trust a woman's intuition. I can't tell you how many videos I've seen where a woman says the baby's coming and it says, oh, honey, It's not. Don't worry about it. The next thing you know, she's like having the baby in her pants in the ER or something like that, or was sent home and has the baby on the road in the car outside. We've seen a couple of videos of that lately. Or if doctor thinks that your baby's not growing well, there's some problem, and the woman thinks, no, I think my baby's fine. If I was a betting man, I put my money on the mother more than I put my money on the maternal fetal medicine specialist. And on the contrary, if the testing says the baby's fine and the mother says, I am having a bad feeling right now, I would listen to that mother. And so if you're free birthing as a woman and you start to feel like, again, you've got the right mindset, you're well educated, and you're starting to feel like this doesn't feel right, then listen to yourself. And don't be like overboard, like the story in The Guardian, where, you were told not to listen to yourself. It's going to work. Don't worry. No, if you just listen to yourself, all of us know our own body better than anybody else. We can go to the doctor and we can, we have a pain in our knee and our doctor says, well, everything we can't find anything wrong. But I know there's something wrong.
Right. I feel it.
Right. So you go get a second opinion or you get a third opinion, you figure it out. That's the same thing here. We should trust the intuition of women. We should get back to that basic thing. And could we do worse than we're doing right now?
I hope not. God.
That's what I get. It always gets not about intentions. It always gets back to outcomes. And God, if we had better outcomes in 1970. And I know they want to blame it on women being too fat or being too old or they're older or all the other problems we have in our health right now. That doesn't justify a 700% increase in cesarean section rate. And in some countries, it's 1,000% or more, 2,000%. It doesn't, nothing justifies that. It is the system, it is the interventions that man has created that are not serving us well. They're leading us down a path that I don't see turning around with the current leadership that we have in obstetrics. They think everything's hunky-dory. Even if they don't, their solutions are going to always be to do more stuff as opposed to maybe backing off and looking at root causes and maybe, getting rid of the volume system and the for-profit. Again, hospitals and doctors deserve to make a living. Everybody and nurses deserve to make a living. The problem is you can't be rewarding bad outcomes. Yeah. And that's where we're at.
Well, thank goodness for people like you.
Yeah, we need, thank you. You're welcome. You're welcome. And people like you and the idea of just learning simple skills, like my passion right now, because I am retired from clinical care, age caught up to me. I just couldn't be on call anymore. It's really hard being on call, which I understand why there are group practices and doctors want to do that. But my passion now is getting the word out and then reteaching the breech and twin skills because they're not hard. And the outcomes are so much better. Yes, you'll have a bad outcome. Yes, I know that. People listening, people are shaking their heads. Yes, but they're so much better for mother and baby. And it's such a normal thing. And it's been taught to us as taboo. And you have to realize that there's secondary gain for that reason. Somebody is gaining by scaring you. And fear is the greatest motivator of any kind. Yeah. So, God, it's such a wonderful, beautiful thing. It's to poison it like modern medicine has done. I don't even know what else to say at that point. I'll tell you honestly, I miss being I don't miss being on call, but I miss those moments of just watching the change that takes place in the couple when the baby comes out and that woman goes from screaming and swearing and grimacing and in awful pain. And suddenly she's like, wow, this is so great. I can't wait to do it again. No. But to see that transition of a woman gaining her power like that, I'd like to see it be much more common.
Yeah. Amen. It really can be such a beautiful, transformative experience. And not that it can't in the hospital, but I think that, you're speaking to it in your direct experience and my very limited direct experience. That's my understanding.
And I'll end with this one thing about my colleagues in the hospital setting is that I think putting all their bondage aside, I just think they're not happy. You don't see the completion of your work. You don't get to set your own schedule. You don't have your own name on the door. You're working a shift. They're just not happy. And how are they? How do I know they're not happy? Because happy people don't treat the other people the way that doctors and nurses treat some women in labor. You don't yell at someone. You don't bully someone. You don't roll your eyes. You don't get in a huff. You don't go back to the nurse's station and say, God, that stupid lady in room 6 is declining a vaginal exam. You don't do that. Happy people don't treat people that way. So if I can say anything to my colleagues, break free from that system. I know that you have loans and I know that you have expenses and you think that you can't. It's like the person clinging to the proverbial rock in the stream, afraid to let go because they don't know what's around the bend. But are you really happy doing what you're doing? And if so, you're happy, then why are you treating people like that? And if you're not happy, do you want to do that for another 20 years? Do you want to be unhappy for another 20 years? You can break free of that system. You could go back to private practice. You might take a hit. You might be on call more. You could find one other like-minded person and share a call. You could help midwives do home birthing. You can do these sorts of things. And you can bring changes to your hospital and your hospital policies. You can get on the committees. You can try to influence ACOG instead of just paying your dues every year and then nodding at everything they say. Challenge them. Speak up. Because as you know, if you don't speak out, you're part of the problem.
Dr. Stu, this has been great. Thank you so much for being here. This was awesome.
Thanks
You're
for
a legend. You're a legend. I know you probably won't receive that, but you're a legend.
I appreciate that. You're not the first person that said that to me. I still get embarrassed when people say that to me.
Oh, you're a legend. This is great.
Well, thank you. It's easy being me at this point. I'm just grateful to those first midwives who approached me and all the coattails of all the midwives who've come since, who have taught me the things that I'm sharing with you. By the way, pretty much everything obstetricians do, they stole from midwives, and then they made it worse. Because who taught the first surgeons, which were, before there was a thing, before obstetrics was even a thing? The American College of OB-GYN was founded in 1951. So who was in charge of obstetrics before 1951?
Midwives.
Yeah. Right. I mean, they were already being vilified by that whole process, but obstetrician wasn't a thing until the second half of the 20th century. And yet our outcomes really pretty much since the advent of antibiotics and sterile surgical technique and washing your hands between cadaver lab and doing a vaginal exam without wearing gloves, we haven't really gotten much better. That's an understatement. We've gotten much worse. Right. So thank you. Thanks for having me on. And by the way, you can cut this part out if you want, but I've started listening to your podcast. I mean, I've never seen somebody who's more eclectic and knows more things and interviews more interesting people than you. I'm fascinated with all the things that are out there for people to learn if they just get off their butt and stop scrolling. Yep. And stop watching reruns of Rick and Morty, whatever you're watching,
I appreciate
get out
that.
there because, our health is ours and we can live a long, healthy life if we just take better care of ourselves.
Amen. Amen.
I went to this is again, we're just chatting here, but I went to my 50th high school reunion last year. And it's fascinating to be in a room where everyone in the room is the same age as you. That's something you don't see. And so you can compare and you can look around and you can see people that look really good and you can see people that look really bad and really old. And I think the really bad old ones probably are the ones that didn't come to the reunion. But, my generation was, I think, food was just food. If my mom sent me to the grocery store to buy tomatoes, I bought 3 tomatoes. I didn't have 16 different kinds of tomatoes. I didn't have to go to the organic section.
Yeah, I didn't have to check the number.
Yeah, that kind of stuff. I don't know. I think for the most part, life was just simpler and easier. And I look at those people. We had 900 and some people in our graduating class, and over 100 are dead. But statistically, that's about what it should be. But I'd like to see that. I'd like to see people that I love and care for take better care of themselves one of the hardest things, and you probably have this too in your family, is watching people who don't know what you know.
I know.
Doing
and won't listen.
Right. They won't listen. They're still getting their COVID boosters, or they're still giving their newborn a hepatitis vaccine, or they're taking antibiotics every time they have a sniffle. Yeah. I can't, it's funny. My family will call me when they have a medical problem, but when it comes to something pregnancy related, they don't know. No one listens to me.
What?
I know. Isn't that weird?
That's so weird. That's so backwards.
Yeah. I've had nobody in my family's had a home birth.
Really? That's crazy.
No, I mean,
likewise,
I would have known, when my kids were born, I had no idea that I didn't know anything what I know now.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, I can say the same for my family. Like, a lot of them are fully indoctrinated, but we keep on keeping on, keep on doing our thing. So Dr. Stu, thank you so much. This was great.
Thank you, Alex, for having me.